Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to Lincoln University. My name's Stuart Tarters. I'm Associate Professor in Applied Computing and Director of the Centre for Geospatial and Computing Technology here at the University. And it's my pleasure to be your MC for what promises to be a very interesting event today. So welcome to today's innovation series, and the series this year is all about exploring how innovation and sustainability are shaping the future of farming in our Tyrol. Agriculture is adapting quickly from precision agriculture and automation to renewable energy projects and new land use opportunities. So our focus today is on how can New Zealand farmers harness technology and innovation to stay productive, competitive and resilient in a changing world. So before we get underway with our speakers, the obligatory health and safety, in the event, hopefully very unlikely, of an earthquake, please shut, cover and hold. There are no fire drills scheduled, so if the fire alarm goes, then we need to assume that it is a real one. And if we could just exit through the doors at the back and gather on the nice green lawn out there and await further instructions. Bathrooms, straight out of these doors and just across in the corridor behind. And most importantly, refreshments during the breaks down that way, and lunch also will be served later down there. So our series today is split into 3 sessions. Our first session is technology on the land, precision, automation and profitability. And we explore in this session the practical applications of emerging technologies, robotics, IoT, drones, data tools, and how they're helping lift farmers' productivity and resilience. And our first speaker this morning is Kenneth Irons from Ag Sorted. Kenneth is former chair of Agritech New Zealand and serves as New Zealand's head of delegation for the ISO Technical Committee on data-driven agri-food systems. He has a background spanning the medical, aviation, media and banking industries across 5 countries, and he brings cross-sector expertise in using real-time, sensor-based data to drive better decision-making. Kenneth's now focused on Agritech and is the Managing Director of Ag Sorted, leading investment and commercialisation projects that enable next-generation smart farming across international markets. So with that, could you join with me in welcoming Kenneth Irons?
Good morning. Let's see a full room and let's see how this full day turns out to be. I'm going to take a fairly high level overview of some of my observations that come partly from previous career experiences in other sectors and how that compares with how the primary sector operates, and particularly in the context of technology. This is a ledger book from, look up closely, 1932, 1st of October 1932. Mr. Bergen came into that grocer's shop to pay for his groceries that he'd done 30 something for purchases during the month. And so here, written up in copper plate handwriting, is a ledger book from 1932 from a little grocer shop. The grocer shop that it comes from is this one, W.D. Borkham, a grocer and provision merchant in Foxton. How did I come by this photograph? Well, the gentleman in the suit is my grandfather. The gentleman to his left is my dad, and the other 2 are staff in the grocery shop. This is my family up close. The handwriting was by my mother in the middle of the photograph, went at the age of 17. Rather than focus on me though, focus on my brother behind me, that's Stuart. Stuart took over from mum and dad, dad and mum took over from granddad. Here's Stu being given life membership of Foodstuffs when he was chairman of Foodstuffs, running a business of $7.5 billion at the time. Here is the supermarket in Levin with somebody scanning. You can see the photos a couple of years old because there's still plastic bags there. But what's interesting about this to me is that from my mother writing and handwriting to my brother running a supermarket with a scanner, you see a certain amount of technological progress. Meanwhile, back at the same time my mother was writing ledger books, these four gentlemen were employed by the original DSIR, and they were here in Canterbury starting the process of soil testing. That is concurrent with this crop plan, which was written in 1924. So same order of magnitude as my mother's ledger book. Times have moved on, and we now have a very competent accounting firm in Gore producing an on-farm emissions report. Here's my observation. From ledger books to scanners, it took one generation in supermarketing. In farming, it took one generation to go from paper records to paper records. If you want to sell technology to a supermarket, you don't go to the checkout operator. If you want to sell technology to an airline, you don't go to a pilot. If you want to sell technology to a bank, you don't ask for the teller. You want to sell technology to a hospital, you don't ask for the surgeon. But when you go to a farm to sell technology, the only person you can talk to is the farmer. There is no chief information officer. Mind you, there's no chief financial officer, chief marketing officer. In other words, farms are small businesses. And that's the reality of farming. And in technology, we have an exponential degree of complexity in technology, facing an accelerating degree of demand, producing a exponential curve of capability requirement, and yet in the context of an owner-operator business, which is what a farm is. I'm not talking about this because it's farming. I'm talking about this because it's a small business. Exponential degree of complexity and a linear rate of learning. And so we get a gap between the capability to understand and absorb and implement best practice technologies. People like Andrew and I have spent a lot of time on farms, and we've been to an awful lot of sheds that have got an awful lot of tin collecting dust, indicating a challenge for technology adoption in farms, where in the interface between an experienced vendor like Scott's been with CropX, arriving on a farm who's got to deal with finance and recruiting and animal health and crop protection and all of the other complexities of running a small business, that the capability of the salesperson is greater at that point of sale than it is of the buying capability of the buyer. And so we have this challenge within that, which I believe is unique to the ag sector. Certainly from my experience originally in the health sector, there is a common theme, which I won't go into, but having worked in different sectors, I've worked largely in sectors where functional specialisation is capable. So we're going to open today's session by looking at a four-step mantra that I've developed and sort of polished a little bit over time, and it's still needs a lot more work. But we want to look at the concept of optimization, which is preceded by digitization, which is preceded by standardization, which can be followed by certification. Let's walk through these four. Come on in. Welcome. Let's walk through these four headings. As you will know, MPI is currently working on a project called Double Farm Exports, otherwise known as the 100 billion plan, different other names. And it essentially boils down to folks in MPI like Jenny Cameron and Chris Kerr and one or two others and many others, looking at how New Zealand can increase the 58 billion that was contributed in 2024 to our total of all product exports of 100 billion 2024 was the first year when New Zealand just tipped over 100 billion in exports, excluding services. 58 billion of that came from the primary sector. And the plan is to grow that 58 billion to 100 billion by 2034. It's a 10-year plan. Here is it today, 2020 is 2025. We're already a year into the plan. It hasn't been released yet. That's an indicator of what's coming. This is the $58 billion base. This is simplistically a projection of 17 billion that's included in the metrics. It's not inflation adjusted. And so the actual growth is 25 billion over a base of 58, which is not double, it's 42% when I went to school. So if you're starting to detect a little uncertainty in my comments, you're exactly right. So here's the documents that have been produced a year into the 10-year plan. And my challenge or my observation here, particularly coming from an ISO point of view, I'll touch on that in a moment, is that there are these four pillars of doubling farm exports, delivering solutions to farmers, protecting us from pests and diseases, and backing the primary sector to win. Those four pillars are what is published in the strategy. My observation is that these four goals, all of these could be significantly optimized by digitization. These parts of the first pillar, these are the second, all of the third, and some of the things in the fourth, all could benefit from strategically thought through digitization. So, look back over the history of MPI's capability. I'm paying attribution here to Dr. Eldred Kahia from University of Canterbury, who spoke on this. This is his slide from this topic that he addressed here in this university back in April, is that these are the 5 previous attempts at contributing significantly to New Zealand's primary sector's growth. And in Eldred's view, far more qualified than mine, being the Professor of International Trade and Marketing at Canterbury, at UC, is that none of those 5 initiatives achieved the goals that they set out to achieve. Not to say that there weren't significant value in doing so, it's not zero benefit, but there are certainly challenges, and that's reality in any plan anyway. So we accept that. But we need to add to that what happened with Hiwaka Ikanoa, and it probably was worth also considering the MFAT initiative, which was to grow the contribution to GDP that was derived from exports in 2012, from what at the time was 23%. The target was to grow it to 40% contribution by 2024, last year. In fact, the result was actually, it didn't go from 23% to 24%. From 23 to 40, it went from 23% to 24%. So we don't have a great track record in terms of exactly knocking it out of the park when it comes to governments running these kinds of initiatives. So let's go to the next consideration and put these things together. We all do our share pro bono. My bit is to do with standards. So I'm the head of delegation for New Zealand on the global ISO committee for the development of 3rd generation standards for data-driven agri-food systems. That's a schema that came out of the strategic advisory group, which is complicated for me. So I simplified it to look like this. And this has now been adopted within the ISO framework. That if we put in the middle of our focus farmers and growers, and we consider all the various specialties, how do we think about that? How do we put that in context of digitizing agri-food systems? Because it is an integrated system. So we've got input providers on the left, we've got output processors on the right, and simplistic, this is a very simple schema, it's not meant to cover everything, that we have the value going through the middle. We then also have value providers, vets, agronomists, academics, researchers, banks, insurance companies, who are supporting and facilitating that flow of value add across the middle of the screen. And of course, we have the police, we have the regulators, the compliance organisations, very important to ensure the health and safety of the food that we produce, and continued exports to world markets and trade barriers and non-tariff barriers and so on. Let's see what happens when we just keep that in mind as we go to the next one. So here's the central part of what I want to discuss, is that yes, we can proceed digitization with standardization. By the way, we've seen an example of running off down and producing an isolated standard that doesn't have a global scale with the development of the New Zealand grass-fed standard, which turned out to be only an administrative standard without any certification capability other than self-certification. At the same time, as exactly the same thing popped up in Canada. Ireland already had one now. Australia's doing the same thing. So we now do not know what grass-fed standard means, because my meter's this long, your meter's that long, and somebody else's meter's that long, and we can't compare meters, and we can't compare grass-fed. So you can't produce standards from the bottom up. It happens all the time. Can't stop people doing it, but you really need to create standards from the top down. That's why ISO, ICAR, GS1, AgGateway, those kind of global organisations work, because when they produce a standard, yeah, sure, it's slow and cumbersome, but it sticks, and the value is there. So now let's think about this with digitisation. Let me just quickly give you a context for a start. It can be said, and it's a little bit distilled and therefore a bit simplifying, that there are three generations of ag tech. First generation is precision farming, been around 30, 40 years. It's variable rate plantings, pointing your tractor in a straight line with auto steer and those kinds of capabilities. Very valuable, still here, foundational layer, and we build on it. Second generation is digital farming. We go from paddock scale. Precision farming is really what happens in the paddock. Digital farming is now what happens across the property. So you can be over this side of the farm and a soil moisture probe or a milk vat monitor or a cow collar or something will tell you what's happening in other parts of the farm. And so you've now got a property scale perspective from second generation digital farming. We've now got third generation, which is smart farming, and use the word smart in the same sense of smart cities, which is the idea that before you put the pipes underground, you work out where the hospital's going to be and how many school buses you need. And so you've got integrated capability across an ecosystem, and that's essentially what we get in smart farming. But there's another aspect that's very important. In the first two generations, it could reasonably be said by the farmer that what happens behind her farm gate is her business. But when you get to smart farming and you consider carbon and all of the other implications about planet scale, it's now part of a much wider ecosystem. And so the water that runs out of your farm or the rain that falls on or the diesel fumes that go into the sky don't stop at the farm boundary anymore. So you've gone from controlled paddock scale and property scale to out of your control planet scale. And that's where we get the origination of the cost on farmers to do their part towards environmental sustainability. Not exactly the same, but similar, is three generations of farm management systems. First generation farm management systems, there's still some around, they're even still being created, like coming up with a brand new Chrysler Valiant today, is the idea of a farm management record system. And why this is significant is because we don't have CIOs working in farms with small businesses, that's fine. But what we find is that there's a very significant emphasis on farm management systems, only about writing down what I did yesterday, because I might need to report something in the future. In other words, it's just a record about what happened yesterday, doesn't change anything, doesn't really contribute to decision making, but it's about the past. I'm going quickly, there's acres of things we could cover. Sorry, hectares under this. Second generation is farm management information systems, which is really reflective of digital farming, because we've now got centre originated data that's audit quality, it's coming into a database, able to be an informing system, and you actually learn something from a second generation system, whereas a first generation system, you really don't learn anything at all. It's only recording. Now we're getting to the stage of third generation farm management decision systems, which bring predictive analytics and all of the merits of advanced technologies and AI and all of the other capabilities. So we go from being about the past, adding in the second generation to the present. Now we can also add to predictive analytics about improved future outcomes, both within the farm and across the wider ecosystem at planet scale. Okay, so I'm getting you ready to start. I'm going to start challenging you in a second to come up with some responses to me. So how are we doing for time? We better crack along. What ISO is contributing in TC347, and it's really still only just really getting major momentum globally, is to produce the road code for third generation smart farming. So essentially what that therefore enables is that we can start bringing in reference data. The codes underneath are the various working groups within TC347. We can agree on what things mean. We can agree on the resources that are involved. You can see this, look at this later if we want. I'm just trying to get to the next stage. That we can now have descriptive analytics, which is about what's happening on the farm, around the farm, with the inputters, with the output processes. And then we can look at the diagnostics, which we can tell us why it happened. Then we're able to say, with predictive analytics, what's likely to happen. And this is the most important, valuable part of what's coming out of this, is that prescriptive analytics will tell us how we can make it happen. So we can get ahead of the game and contribute thought and decisions today that are going to result in optimized outcomes. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, these are the various farm walks that you've been on, I've been on. My observation is that the half-life of knowledge transfer in this environment is very short. I spoke to one of the in fact, the speaker at the last event here was that particular farm. That's High Peak Station. I spoke to one of the scientists who was at that meeting and that farm walk, and I said, how long do you think it will be before this knowledge that's been transferred today will sort of fade a bit? You know, I was thinking about how it gets back onto the farm and maybe you think to do something differently or improve whatever. He said, I'd have to get last past the lunch barbecue. So, and we're still surrounded by folks capturing information in not exactly the ideal way. There's a good example of a paper record of a fertilizer plan. It's not to any standards. It's recording intended data, not what actually happened. There's a 30% difference right there. There's no variable rate, there's no auto steer, there's no result analysis, and it was really only because at some point in the future that particular farmer is going to have to produce a 190 report, and so he can look back over his notebook and find it. Same sort of thing, but don't you love this one? This is a major farm inputs business, non-trivial. That's the driver of that view is the agronomist. That's her records written on the inside of the car windscreen that get wiped off tonight, and that's her crop protection plan. She rings the farmer and says, this is what I'm going to do. She rings the sprayer and says, do this, and then she wipes it off the board, and that's it. The records are gone. That happens today. So not exactly. Imagine if your airline pilot, when you're going on holiday to Singapore, wrote on the window of the plane the flight plan, or the doctor wrote on the the bright lamp over the surgical unit what operation it was going to do. Yes, you can see what I'm meaning. Okay, so this is what happens when we actually analyze using conjoint analysis. Two-party trade-off technology, conjoint analysis or multi-criteria decision analysis. This is some work that was done late last year, looking at farmers choosing what are important capabilities to have in farm management systems. And this is what happened. When we looked at 11 farm management systems that were available, there's really only one statistic that I'd like you to see here, and that is that when you use conjoint analysis, you take away the brand influence. So if you want to buy a new car, I'll give you two choices. You can have leather seats, but pretty ordinary air conditioning, or you can have plastic seats, but really good air conditioning. Obviously, you want nice, comfortable seats and you want good air conditioning, but in conjoint analysis, what you're saying is you've got a trade-off to make between one good, one bad, and one bad, one good. And after you've asked use an AI system to generate the questions that are in response to the previous reply, you start to get in behind brand influence and understand what your real weightings of your priorities are. So you get an unfiltered view of what the consumer really needs or wants out of a mobile phone or a holiday, or in this case, a farm management system. There's only one statistic on this that I want you to look at, and that is that where the farmers chose what 78 different functions you could have in a farm management system, and the 23 that were most important, that were most relevant, the rest were really kind of nice to have. And then within those, choose a dozen or so and rank them according to their priority to a huge number of farmers who participated in the survey. When the software results came back, what it showed us from that management system in the analysis page was that the best product available still didn't meet 2/3 of the priorities that farmers gave using their own self-diagnostic capability when they're not even expected to be specialists in farm management systems. So what we were able to do from that is produce what's called the efficiency frontier, which is obviously, you can see I'm anonymizing the entries, but it's that yellow line there really represents on a value and price XY axis how good we, if your phone delivered 62% of the features you wanted, would you believe in mobile technology? If your car delivered 62% of what you really need, of the priorities of what you need in a vehicle that's suitable for your need, would you really be comfortable with spending a lot of money on a car? So my sense is that AgTech's got a long way to go yet in being able to deliver farm management systems that really meet the market. So we tested that. And we said, what happens if we look at an ideal product that actually delivered against the features? And the satisfaction rate went from 62% to 96%. In other words, it's possible to actually create technology in the third generation that actually meets requirements that farmers intrinsically understand, but don't necessarily know how to diagnose. So when we put that back on the efficiency frontier, it's less cost, more capable, and that technology is now right on the cusp of dropping into the market around the world, and it's coming from a lot of the work that's being done in different countries. Okay, so how could we might apply this to the New Zealand market? Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the concept of the living lab. Any nods in the room? Living labs, the idea that you take a crop trial, which might be 4 plots wide, 10 plots long, they're 10 square meters each, they're micro scale. What you do is you take that whole concept and you apply it to full fields across hundreds of farms, and you're not prescriptive about what you tell the farmer what he or she needs to do in the field. You just capture the data and bring it back into your database from your crop trial system, and you say that 30 hectares a week is actually plot number 17 on my 40 trial plots, but you do it at scale. That's the simplistic part of it that I want. What this enables us to do, I think, is to put out a challenge here that when we come back to the optimization square in my 4-step mantra, that what we identify here is ways that New Zealand can significantly improve its permanence of capability to meet global demand by being able to metricate and report on soil health, on water management, on biodiversity conservation, on livestock stewardship and climate resilience in a way that is credible, standards-based, and therefore metricated in a way that we can back up the claims that we make as being clean and green. So let's finish with the 4-step mantra, and then I've got some questions for you. If we were to become the world's largest living lab, we could deal with things like the one you mentioned, you're meeting with Simon Upton tomorrow. He wants to produce a federated data system for New Zealand's environmental data. Blinkers, it's part of a much greater ecosystem than just environmental data. Very important, but why would we go and produce a separate database for that? That's what we're all too bad at doing. So if we were able to create a standards-based system that enabled us to take the advantages and tools of living labs and apply it to New Zealand, then we could look at this kind of prediction that we've seen coming out of MPI, which is very useful information. That is, what does the future look like for New Zealand in the 2040? We've got an ability to be more like the left map than the right map, and that's significantly non-trivial. Right, here's my question. Whose job is it to do each of these? All of you in this room have significant influence across the New Zealand economy, and particularly in the primary sector. This is the centre of excellence here at Lincoln University. We've got academics in the room, we've got some farmers in the room, we've got farm professionals in the room. Whose job is it to do each of these four? Can I have some comments and then I'll close?
Everyone.
Hmm?
Everyone.
Yes, but I would narrow it down a bit. Everybody can't do everything. So if we're going to work on the basis of specialisation and division of responsibility, whose job is it to do any of these? Anybody got any thoughts? Because what I'm trying to identify is whose job is it not? Okay, I'll start you off. I think that certification needs to be in the hand of the police, the referee, the guy with the whistle. It's not farmers' job to self-evaluate. It's not output processes. You need verification, certification. When you write an ISO standard, there's always two parts to it, and they're completely separate. It's rules of the road in ISO and GS1 and the other regulatory bodies that you produce a standard. But being able to certify that someone meets that standard is not the job of the standards organisation. It's the job of a separate entity of certifier. So my view is that the job of the ref is to blow the whistle when something's happening on farm, in the food chain, in the factory, whatever, that's not up to current standard, because we need to keep food safe. I started life in the medical sector. I used to dispense prescriptions against people who had had a lifetime of eating the wrong food, and now they're on beta blockers and insulin and everything else. So in my career, I've come right up the front end, and I'm now talking about, crop protection and sustainability, soil quality and what have you. And I love it because I can see where it got to after 40, 50, 60 years of eating the wrong food, because I used to dispense the prescriptions that tried to keep people alive from bad choices. Now I'm up the front end, enjoying being at the much more creative and productive end. Okay, so I didn't get any responses for certification. Does anybody disagree with me that it's the job of governments and regulators and quality assurance to blow the whistle when things are going a bit screwy? Right then, this one's easy. Plenty of us do our thing. We've all got some kind of pro bono work we do. But in my case, I chuck my head in the ring for a bit of standards work. Any agreement, disagreement? I've been enough caffeine taken this morning. Am I right?
Yep.
No. Good. I got a. Well, Armin's going to have. This is good for Armin because he's coming up after me. So here we go. His job is to undertake digitisation, develop digital tools. Good for now? Okay. Terribly important that rigorous scientific evaluation applies to all of them. I keep the best for last. My view is that optimization is the responsibility of the middle three boxes of my blue. Who's not there? Under 3. Who's missing? From my earlier slide. Who's doing the optimization plan at the moment that hasn't been released 10% of the time into the 10-year plan? Yes. My view is it is not the job of the ref to carry the whistle, cross over the line and pick up the ball and run with the optimization of the game. My view is that the development of the 10-year plan, yes, we absolutely need trade barriers removed. Yes, we absolutely need quality assurance. We need all those kind of things. But writing a commercial plan for me is not the view of the fifth box, the blue one at the bottom. And the track record tends to support that assumption, that hypothesis, that it's up to input providers, farmers and growers and output processors to get together to develop commercial plans that contribute to the growth of New Zealand's wealth and well-being by the critical important nature of the primary sector to New Zealand's economy. That's how we pay for our schools and hospitals and roads, largely. But it's not the job of the ref to come over and write business plans and encourage people, because I know what the budget is that's applied to that. And there are so many organisations doing work for free, like A Lighter Touch and Food Loss and Waste, and on and on it goes. There's dozens of us. ISO's another one doing great work, and we can't get 20 grand. And yet there are billions being applied to the 10-year plan, and we're 10% into it, hasn't been released yet, on the back of 5 that came before that didn't knock it out of the park. I leave that thought with you, and I'm happy to hand over the difficult questions to Armin, because he'll do a much better job of it than me. Thank you.
And at the end of the section, we'll have an opportunity to come back and have some further discussions. So our next speaker is Dr. Armin Werner, who's an agronomist with expertise in crop modelling, land use and precision agriculture. He earned his PhD from the University of Bonn and held research roles at Michigan State University and as director of the Institute of Land Use Systems in Germany. Since 2013, Armin has led a multidisciplinary research group at Lincoln Agritech, focusing on precision farming, livestock, horticulture, spraying and robotics. And he also serves as an adjunct professor at Lincoln University, where he's taught precision agriculture since 2015. Armin is going to be talking on the rise of smart farming from drones to decision making. So if you'd like to welcome Armin.
And if this was unfair, you cannot just drop the ball to me and say I'm the expert. You made a great presentation. Thank you very much. But it's a good introduction, I think, giving us the understanding what is necessary to create the future. We call it smart farming. For me, smart farming is nothing that is just coming. We talk about that since 40 years already, since I did my studies. There was always the discussion, what can we really create for farmers with digital data, with computers, with all the technologies that come behind that. And this means that we need to find out what can be done without labeling it. I understand when a colleague that works in the standardization and international standardization is a very important role that he has, Kenneth, but standards is one part of this technology development, and being flexible and to manage everything in a way that we understand what we can also create, because creation is always very flexible, will be part of what I try to explain today. What was the problem? This is written intentionally in the past tense because we may have already a solution, but I will show you what is the possibility. Everyone talks about this slogan. Actually, Agritech, my company where I work almost for 14 years now, had this as a logo, as a motto for everything that we did. We want to help farmers in their management by creating the technologies and the possibilities that are linked with these technologies to collect data, to use data to make decisions. And I think there is some truth in that sentence if we don't have the possibility to control and to see what we really have, and then later what we did and what was the outcome. If we cannot measure it, then we need to stop managing, because then we just do random things. So we can measure a lot already, and you will see a few novel examples, because I think we are still at the stage where what we can measure is extremely limited. And there's a reason for that, and you will see this during the talk. So even if we think we collect data and agriculture is a big data business, it's not. We don't create the big data like other organizations and other industries. We will, of course, also utilize AI, but there's a problem with that you will see later, why we have challenges to get everything out of what AI is at the moment developing for other industries. There's a problem that's with agriculture in its sense itself. So from my understanding, the question is either will we have a rise in smart farming, or do we have already something going on in that space? And I would like to look into this kind of future. For us as researchers and developers in the industry, connecting with the industry always, we have a few issues. Are we already drowning in data? Do we not see what is really happening? So farmers have no possibilities to manage their data. Are we having the right data? I have some doubts. And of course, when we really look into that, can we use the data and how can we do it? I was asked to talk from a drone component in this smart agriculture development. For me, UAVs are an important tool, especially in research. It means I also stop there. I think, yes, UAVs can help a lot in certain areas, and you will see a few examples, but I would not bank into that, and I would hardly invest in an industry that creates these tools for me as a researcher, probably not for farmers. At least I get feedback from farmers that tell us we have a few examples where we definitely need these tools and you will see them, but we will not put our business, everything into this kind of technology. Another country is begging a lot into what they call it low altitude economy, and this is China. If you would live in China, you would get your food in a few hours, not by somebody that brings it to you. A UAV will land close to your property. You have your own landing spot where you can order some food, you can order some medication. Companies and in that case also hospitals, they have their landing spot already secured from the environment so that you don't have a risk when it lands. And all this is really happening. And the Chinese government is pushing a lot into this kind of upcoming economy. It's 1,000-meter height, so it's still in the area where you could have challenges with other aircraft, but I think they manage it in a decent way. And of course, packages and everything else is already in their development. Probably it's still pilot study type, but it's coming to a level where you can just drop your package somewhere. It will be picked up by the UAV and will be carried to that place where you want to have it. For us, agriculture is more or less also the starting point for most of these developments. People really thought UAVs can help a lot, and they are right to some extent. This is spreading, fertilizer spreading. Of course, you can imagine there's a limitation in the amount, how much you can carry. We have spraying UAVs that really carry a lot of high concentrated liquids, so you can really spray like in farms with tractors, in orchards. All this happens. The way where I think really we will have more of these UAVs, especially for herbicide applications and some also for fungicide applications, are conditions when you cannot enter the field. When it's too wet, too steep, or some other reasons why you cannot do this. The center picture shows weed management with UAVs in forestry. New Zealand as well as Australia have a very keen interest, and Australia is doing a lot already in using UAVs to spray their early plantation for the first 2 or 3 years when you still need to control weeds because of their problems with wet conditions in spring, or sometimes it's too steep and it's too dangerous. So it's a really important part of their business now to use that. And you can scale up. This is the example of a company in the United States that manages 50-hectare fields with huge UAVs, infrastructure. You see the tanks in the truck and all this is there. And they manage it in the way that the farmer really say, yes, we can complement our own spraying, or we just replace everything with spray. The question is for me, because we talk about smart farming, what is smart there? It's a carrier that carries spray liquids or sprays, so it does activities like a tractor. The smart does not come from the machine itself, hopefully from the people that use the spraying technology or spreading technology. But I think the smart comes when you use these carriers as carrier for sensors that we probably can use for collecting the data that we need. And this is more or less the starting point for my short introduction of different sensors that are necessary from our understanding for now and in the future. to add to what we have already. We don't use many sensors in agriculture to collect data. And it's correct, we need to have standardization to collect data, to use data, to make value out of the data, but we need also to have the data from kind of input, and this is a sensor, and this is where the smarts really starts, how to collect data in a way that you can use them at the end. And what data can you collect? A few examples, and this is a typical example from dairy farming. Most of you know that it's a feed wedge problem to organize more or less your grazing management between paddocks. Which paddock is tomorrow the next one that needs to be grazed, and it depends on this wedge of different biomass heights. The ranking is just as the paddocks have been measured. And this is now the question, how do you measure paddocks and what is really happening in agriculture in New Zealand, in dairy farming, with these possibilities that we have. We have a few standard tools. This, the first one on top left, is probably known to many of you. This is a CDEX pasture meter. Pasture meters can be like this one with light bars. It could be acoustic with ultrasound. It could be different, but this is the most used one, I think, and it's one of those that are really working well. And it was a New Zealand product, and it's still on the market. We also have a machine that carries that as a robot, and the yellow box on the left side on the bottom is a robot that does the same as if you would pull it with your ATV or whatever you have, but it gets much more accurate data because it's runs slower and it has more time, and it can also collect data as you want to do it, more or less in the time. You can just program and it will happen any time of the week when you need the data. Besides doing this with these sensors on the ground that you can pull behind your ATV or UTV, or you even can do the rise and plate meter manually, all this is available. Besides that, we sometimes run into the problem that farmers ask us, but I would like to have a sensor that does not require me to go to the field, capture data on field, because it's time consuming. I have not the time. My cows need to be milked. I have problems with feeding and everything else. These are realities that I see from farmers, and they don't use them sometimes, the technology. This is the possibility where we think that because it's remote sensing, using sensors that are either on a tractor or eventually could be also on a UAV, or it could be just from a satellite. All these sensors are doing the same job that is described here. It's a correlation between a sensor on the X line on the bottom and the yield on the Y line. That means on the Y axis that it shows it's possible to use these sensors to assess the biomass. And this biomass data of the paddock can then feed this feed wedge that you have seen that allows to say which paddock should be grazed tomorrow. Here, how much is really used? And this is some work that Derry and Zet, our colleagues there, Brian De La Rue and Colin Eastwood did in last 2 years. This is a number of the use of these kind of sensors, and this is more or less the blue one that is interesting for us. The blue one is that one that uses technology. Farmers, of course, can also go to their field paddocks and say, yes, I understand there is a certain biomass. I assume, I estimate from my experience, this data show me it's a paddock that has, I don't know, 1,500 or 2,000 kilograms of biomass as a dry matter per hectare. But you can also do it with sensors, and I'll show you a few ones. But you see these sensors here, and there are those sensors that you typically find in New Zealand or other countries that use this kind of rotational grazing. It's a plate meter manual. You need to walk it. It takes time, probably a few hours per week when you need to do this. This can be faster, but only 21% of the farmers in New Zealand are using that. So 79% are not. They just rely a little bit on the manual part, visual, so they go there, they see it, or they look into the fields from the distance and say, yes, I can assume this one needs to be grazed tomorrow or not. So we have a problem that the adoption of our technology is lower than what the technology would allow. And this is not only because of cost, it's a problem that is linked more to the people itself, and I will talk about in that second. Besides that it's manually necessary to do something, we had a technology that was available to May this year from LIC. Most of you know LIC. It's a farmers-based organization in managing data from animals. They also offered a system that allowed to take images from satellites and convert it into biomass. And you had more or less every week your feed wedge distributed on your computer. They stopped it, not I think because of lack of use, but it was probably not a profitable business for them. So they stopped it in May. About 1,200 farmers in New Zealand use that technology. 1,200 from probably around 14,000, 140, so 14,000 that we have in New Zealand dairy farmers. So it's less than 10% really used it. Also there you can see, why not? And this is a problem that I want to address. The next sensor technology is using also the possibilities. Can we assess a second component in our feed wedge? And this is not the amount, but the quality of the pasture. Farmers tell us quality would give us a lot of control what we feed to our lambs, to our bulls, to our dairy cows. If we know where's the higher quality at the moment, then we would bring them probably to our lambs so that they can grow faster and whatever. We have technology that can assess this quality, because quality is something that you cannot really see. You can see higher grass, you can see lower grass, but quality, is there more protein, is there less starch available, is there more sugar, is not easy to see. You need typically a lab. You go to the field, collect the sample, send it to some laboratories in Palmerston North or Hamilton, and then they will send you back probably 3 or 4 days later the results. But you have also sensors. These are sensors that you can buy. They're quite expensive, unfortunately, at the moment. They don't come from agriculture typically, they come from other industries. They also measure stuff, chemical composition of this stuff. And you see this is handheld. It means also you have a problem when you look into a pasture paddock of, let's say, 20,000, 20,000 square meters, so 2 hectares. You have a problem that you know the variability in this paddock is high. When you look into the gate area, you have different biomass quality than, let's say, at the end of the paddock. And this means you need to either take a lot of samples, or you can only rely on a few and assume the rest is similar. All this is suboptimal. It will not give you the good data that you probably need to manage your herds. There will be more technologies in the future that can help us to do this faster, for instance, by the possibilities that we have with the virtual fence technologies, the collars that some companies are offering. There may be also the possibility to link this in the future with a second sensor on the collar to quality assessment. But there's still a lot of hope in this technology. We also think there's a need to go into a satellite level. So really talking about satellites that can measure from the distance into these paddocks. And when you look into what is sent from the satellite can see nowadays, this is a paddock of 1,000 square meters. So it's a quite high plot size for us in research. We typically have 100 square meters or 200, but this is 1,400. And you see, this is a pixel, we call it. This is the smallest information unit that you can measure from a satellite. In that case, it's 10 by 10 meters, so 100 square meters. And this is possible to see this variability more or less in this pixel, and you can collect a lot of that. And what we did is we tried to figure out how can we use this information from the satellite. It's an image. This is an image that comes from a satellite, from Sentinel from Europe, and they fly every 5 days across New Zealand. So we use this and say, can we convert these images into a quality assessment? Typically, scientists use a correlative approach. They say we collect a lot of data from such experiments and put this into a regression or some other statistical approach and say, how does this pattern of color that we see in the picture from the satellite, how does it correlate to the quality that we measured on the ground by cutting the individual pieces of the paddocks and analyzing them in the lab? This statistical approach is possible, it works, unfortunately not everywhere. And if you have a correlation well developed for your paddock, it cannot be transferred to a second one. So you need to be very, very precise with your own data. And this means these statistical approaches, and this is most what we find in remote sensing. You know, there are a lot of people that talk about hyperspectral sensing, NIR sensing. All this needs calibration. And this is the way how I just described. This correlation needs always to be recalibrated. It's not simple to calibrate it for New Zealand. You need to have it probably local, or at least for your own farm. This is done, and we use a different approach now. And this was called radiative transfer modeling. It's a way that you try to use not just a correlation. It says there's a similarity between this pixel and the ground truth. So dark color and high protein in the ground can be correlated well, and the same can happen to other values. No, we use a method that is really developed from specialists in remote sensing, not from us, but we try to apply it. And this is use a physical relationship and not trying to match by saying these are similar, but really to understand how the light that you put into the system that reflects from the ground to the satellites, how this is more or less translocated within the biomass itself. It depends on the leaf angle, on the leaf size, on the leaf color. A lot of physical approaches are used. And when you use a physical approach and you have a physical model at the end, that allows you to say physics is correct and true and the same everywhere. The physics that is really true for this room is also the same physics in, let's say, United States, Europe, or somewhere else. And this is why we think these physical approaches, so it's a new method to use remote sensing, is better and helpful for developing such correlations or non-statistical correlations with the, in that case, quality of a pattern. And we had done this with, in that case, it's a chlorophyll content, and we see there are some similarities. We had not enough time. This was a small project only to collect more data, but a kind of pattern comparison showed us it's working, and we could more or less use data from the Sentinel satellite and had some ground truth measurements that fitted quite well with this physical model. With a correlative model, it was not easy for us to find this good match. Besides the measurement from a satellite, we sometimes have the challenge that color itself is not enough. We want to see more than a color of a fruit, for instance. We want to see inside the fruit and would like to find out what is the quality of the fruit. Color typically will not tell you that. You can have a red apple, you can have a green apple, and between there are different color shades. So we need a technology, and this is shown here. It's also not from agriculture, it's from more or less general chemistry that measures some kind of features that are linked to the chemical compounds in the object that we measure. For instance, let's say certain sugars or certain acid that you want to measure in an apple. Or sometimes, and this is the example that we use, we want to measure, can the fruit be infected already with a disease that we cannot see, but it's inside the fruit, or it's starting to create some problems. And this is what we show here. We have this technology that allows to measure a very wide range of, in that case, data from individual molecules. And it's not important to see what we, in that case, did, but we can see differences. And this is the red and the blue lines that I explained in a second that links to different health conditions, in that case of apple fruits. What I want to show is the technology is available. It's available for the closed system. So this is a handheld that you can buy for your own purposes. You can also have handhelds that can measure from a distance up to 2 meters. And you can even measure these kind of features from very far distance with telescope technology with 500 meters. We don't need 500 meters for our purpose here, but for instance, we plan and think we can use this to measure quality of a fruit that is half a meter or a meter away from the row, where we can carry the sensor with a robot or with a tractor, whatever is carrying our sensor through the rows and measure something. And this is now the last example that I can show you. These are apples that, in that case, showed some symptoms of a disease. It's bull's eyes rot. It's a storage disease that happens more or less when the apples are in the storage. So the industry came to us and said, we cannot detect the diseased apples when they come from the orchard and cannot sort them out so that they will not be shipped to Europe, Japan, China. Can you detect them earlier? Can you detect them already when you don't see this? And this is what we tried. Like I said, this is a technology that allows to measure certain chemical compounds, in that case, inside the apples. And you see, for instance, in that case, we measured in 4 points on the apples where typically diseases like that happen. And at the end, we were able to detect these kind of spectra, signatures, we call them also. And these signatures correlate more or less to the disease. And it was possible for us to say we can detect, in that case, it was a very early study, 4 days before you can see the symptoms, before you know there is a bullseye rot infection in that apple because you see it, there you can already say, yes, I know it will happen. And this is a quite accurate system at the moment. We are studying this with the New Zealand apple industry for the 3rd year now, and we are still waiting for the results. The apples are sitting somewhere in Havelock North at the moment in the storage, and we hope that in the next 4 weeks we can collect them and see if they are really infected or not, according to our model. There's still one technology that's interesting, that's why I'm still talking about it. It's called plant wearables. So imagine wearables that you have for your sport activities, some watches or other sensors, collars for cows or sensors. And we've now talked also on wearables for plants, sensors that are sitting on the plant, at the plant itself. We have a few already in the industries, for instance, for sap flow, when you have a vineyard and you want to know is there enough water from the irrigation, then you can measure the sap flow, the flow of water, more or less, of liquids in the stem. And these kind of wearables will come in the next years. They will be very, very small to some extent, or they will be cheap enough that you can put it on many plants and not only one plant. So when we put this together, I think I want just to talk about one problem, because we have challenges. I said we have these technologies, we collect data, but I think we have a data crisis at least, and I have to talk about the second crisis as well. I think we have a lack of data. Even if we have still the impression we collect many data, we have inconsistency of data. There's also the problem of standardization sometimes. And to some extent, we realize farmers don't want them. They don't need them. Even if we ask them before that, if you would like to have them and would have them, what could you do? Our solution is this: we need to really collect more data, and this is very helpful when Kevin and his team will develop these standards, because then we can do it cross companies, cross farms, cross regions. At the end, we will have a large pool of data, and this is now very interesting for the future, and it links very well to what Kenneth Arends has discussed. We need to use these data lakes in the future, not to answer questions, to say we could have a question, certain measurements want to be done, or decision making. We can turn it around, and we will see that we can create new questions with the data. So the AI will be able to find patterns suddenly in these data lakes that we collect, without the purpose to do it for a certain activity and collect them for a certain activity, but really to look into the possibility. Suddenly we can check our data lakes from last 5 or 10 years. What was the reason that something happened in my orchard, in my field, and so on. Besides the data crisis, I think we have a very serious problem with collecting the data, the technology for that. So it's called the sensor crisis. We don't have the right sensors. We don't have the sensors that can really measure what happens in the plant. We can see color changes, we can see patterns on the fruit, and so on. And most of these sensors, and you have seen many handhelds, don't cover the whole field, the farm. They are just, you walk around and need to collect data. So it's not spatially and it's not aerial. And unfortunately, this is my view from being in that business already a few years. We don't have any new sensors in the last 20, 30 years. They are limited. And when you look into not only the technologies that have been developed by nice scientists and researchers, the use of sensors is quite limited. We have 2 or 3 companies in the world that sold for arable farming sensors that look into fertilizer demand, especially nitrogen. You can start guessing. There are, I think, 5 companies in the world that sell these sensors. There's a good reason they work. They can create more yield. They can reduce amount of fertilizer. They can reduce leaching. How many do you guess are used in the world? You will probably have a wrong number because the number of these sensors is probably less than 5,000 to 6,000 in the total world. And we have around 200 million farmers in the world. Of course, different intensities levels, different education levels. So the industry does not use these sensors because of reasons. I think one of the reasons that we have the barriers for using these technologies, poor adoption, why they are not used, despite when you talk to the farmer, they would love to see some of these technologies and have them available because they say this is a helpful tool, but still they don't use it. And it's not because they are not interested in general or they are not educated well enough or they are not wanting to pay for that. The payment is always the last thing that makes a sense or technology available or not. It's not the barrier. The barrier is really that we don't show enough evidence that it works. The farmers say, yes, it works probably in the United States or in Europe, but not in New Zealand. So this is a typical statement that you find everywhere in the world. Every farmer says, if this doesn't work for my neighbor, and I have seen it with my neighbor, then I will not use it. It has to happen for this in New Zealand, and this is a problem that we have to tackle. We have not enough demonstration, testing, and examples that farmers can use and say, yes, this convincing system that I saw with my neighbors can happen for me as well. And one of the, I think, major reasons why technology is not adopted, besides a few that have been adopted, like auto steer, for instance, but the reason for having adoption or no adoption is linked not to the staff, not to the price, not to the technology itself, it's the management. This is my personal view. And I see it more and more also confirmed from other researchers. If the manager of a farm, it could be a CEO, we have some farms with CEOs, or other line managers, they don't see a benefit for reducing their workload, then this will not happen. It will not be implemented because they are afraid that if they need to adjust this into their farm, besides the daily work that they have, they need to add more time and will have problems with their own decision making in other areas. So it's a challenging aspect to really convince that the farm managers will have less efforts in their business when they integrate the center. So it needs to reduce their time, effort, and not to increase. One of the biggest problems is that we cannot overturn is the markets in agriculture is quite small compared to other sensors, other technologies. If you would build sensors for cows, you can imagine this will be a completely difference and big market. The agriculture market with these small numbers of sensors that I applied will not attract industry or manufacturers or developers to build sensors because they know at the end there's a risk that nobody will buy it. This is a challenge for all of our development, and sorry to say that in an area where you scientists are starting to develop new concepts and use them for decision-making purposes, students, researchers, and all of them, we have to overcome this, or we will not be able to create new solutions. We create a lot of technologies, but they will not be applied. I think I should stop here. Stuart, sorry for being a little bit over time, but I want to just give this kind of view to you. Thank you.
Stay up, Armin, and Kenneth, I'll call you up as well. And I think we've got a couple of minutes to take any questions from the floor. So there was a very quick hand here, so I'll.
Yeah, please. For the optimization part, should that be algorithm instead of the farmers? Even and given the
Should it be
algorithm instead of the farmers, especially if you mentioned that they don't have the data. How can they do the optimization?
I would expand the lens on that and say it's all of the points. The point I was making primarily is that I think it is the business community, that is the three blue squares through the middle, the input providers, tractor sellers, fertilizer sellers, whatever, the farmers is in the middle, and the output process, that's the commercial line. Up here is the advisory line, vets, agronomists, whatever, and underneath was the certifiers and governments and trade barrier removals, and those kind of all of those things are important. But my sense is that optimization is primarily the responsibility of businesses and business to business relationships, where you look at shared strategies, shared objectives, shared views, and then say, I'll do this and you do that. That's the division of responsibility piece. What I'm counterclaiming is that it's not the job of governments primarily to drive strategic commercial optimization plans.
Yes, that's correct. Government should keep the hands off, but it's not just the industry that manufactures technology. For me, the kind of digitalization, that is what you said, is a process. It's nothing that happens with just having the technology. You need to have the adoption in a very, very complex way. And that's why I think it's not only the companies that would like to sell technology, it's important that the farmers are involved in that. So I think it's not only just the companies that have the technology, it's the farming business that needs to be involved for digitalization.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah, because it's not on your bottom line. You just said the companies that will develop the technologies are responsible for the digitalization. If the farmers don't want it, and if they don't understand
which was the point of my conjoint analysis, was identifying that farmers can actually self-diagnose what their needs are. Doesn't necessarily mean they can write the code, nor should they. But adoption around practical use on the farm, very important at that interface between the supplier and the buyer. The value is released on the farm.
Kenneth, just a question for you. I was very interested in what farmers were interested as their top 12 things. You said that I think 2/3 of the available technologies or what was being provided for them were not really of top importance. What were the 12 things that were most important?
They were in that bar graph. So yeah, we could probably find it quickly, but yes, what we did was we asked farmers to identify anything and everything they could think of that could potentially be available in a farm management system, and self-reporting 78 items on the list. We then got them to prioritise that, and we got weighted, just distilled that down to 23. And of those 23, you saw the weighting. Interesting, high up the top was fertiliser management, was where all the money goes. All the staff utilisation. I'm trying to think of the other more techy kinds of things. I could put the slide up maybe, but I can tell you which slide it is. It's this one here. Slide number. No, yes, that one. Yes, slide 24. So, and what the conjoint analysis system does, it's actually out of the University of Otago, developed by the professor of economics there. So it's a homegrown product. Yeah, that one. So you can see fertiliser income on it. Yes, per crop profitability, being able to store, capture information about input costs, including labour and diesel and all the crop protection, crop nutrition, being able to identify crop profitability on a per field basis. Interesting seed line reporting was quite important, particularly there's an arable bias to this. What's next? Livestock management, obviously very important. Sprays management. High interest in recognising that this farm management system was actually customised to the New Zealand market, which means essentially being able to do output for like farm environment plans, farm freshwater farm plans, and so on. That's the Kiwiisation of it. What else can we see on the list? Irrigation management, crop insurance programs, scouting out for the agronomist, got made it on the short list. Being able to create variable rate fertiliser prescriptions and export it to the cab. Supporting IPM, very big topic, very hot topic at the moment, integrated pest management. By the way, in ISO, the TC347, one of the specialist subgroups is focusing exclusively on integrated pest management to write some global standards for that. An interesting background too. So the Chinese are very far ahead on IPM. They originally wanted to have a total technical committee, just IPM. And we put the proposal to China that the ISO world, that they should come in and be part of TC347. So important that IPM is fully integrated into other standards. What else have we got on there? Integration with in-cab systems like JD Op Center or case system, whatever. Making nitrogen leaching recommendations, and then we're falling off the bottom with weather station integration and the likes. And interesting carbon scoring, input for carbon scoring ranked quite low, and then there's another 50 below that.
Thank you, Kenneth. The second session is titled Emissions, Land Use Change and Alternative Revenue Streams. So looking at emissions, carbon, forestry and financial innovation and how they shape farm business decisions. We had originally planned to have 3 speakers in this session, but unfortunately, Cairo Akehurst from Cattle Credit is unwell and not able to join us today. Cairo is a local entrepreneur who is working in the methane space, quite literally looking at methane emissions from space with his original business plan using methane sap. So, but don't fear, we have 2 great speakers still to fill the session, and starting with Lincoln University's very own Professor Alan Renwick, who is a Professor of Agricultural Economics and has been here since November 2015. He's had a worldwide career and is currently the co-chair of the Lincoln University Centre of Excellence in Transformative Agribusiness, which aims to be at the international forefront of solutions that will enhance the sustainability of the food and fibre sectors. Its role is to support the development of new products and new ways of working that increase economic and social value whilst reducing the environmental impacts of agribusiness. And Alan's talk is titled From Grass to Trees, Navigating the Economics of Carbon and Forestry Transitions. So please join me in welcoming Alan.
Thank you, Stuart. I sort of slightly edited my talk. It's gone from grass to trees and everything in between, because I probably wasn't paying entire attention when I was given my talk, and suddenly discovered I had a lot of trees in there, and I kind of had more stuff about everything in between. I'm also sorry that Cairo couldn't be here to talk. I was really looking forward to actually hearing what he was up to, but Katie made the fatal mistake of telling me that I have more time. And I think one thing she should learn, she should never tell a professor he's got more time to speak, because he certainly will fill it up. So Stuart probably still have to keep me to time. Stuart, I think, gave a great introduction to the Centre of Excellence, and our co-director of the coding is over here and highlights what we're up to in the centre. I just wanted to put that up. And really, these are the 4 areas that we're kind of working in: alternative energies, alternative proteins, circular economy, and sustainable food system. So today I want to talk in the context of the title I was given in relation to some work the Centre has recently just completed for the ASB Bank on future use of land and how to fund it. So I've been rather creative and turned this report into my From Grass to Trees. So we will talk a bit about the overview, a brief overview of that report. Thinking about scenarios of land use, implications, what that future change might be like, and focusing on one area, which I kind of was maybe linked to the methane talk before, about missing markets that we might have and how we might fill those, and linking also to Ronnie, who's after me, about the finance side. So I feel rather from the digital approach we had in the first session to rather an analog talk here. But I will try and bring it back, because after thinking about that, a lot of what we're talking about, the changes we're talking about, the new markets, etc., will all need technology and technology adoption to help us actually establish those markets. So when I was thinking about the grass to trees issue, I think we sort of get into that initial debate we're having in New Zealand of sheep versus radiata pine, or whether it's farmers versus fibre. These sorts of discussions, obviously very emotive. We can see issues with our declining sheep numbers, and we can see, emotive titles such as foreign forestry conversions, etc., going on. So it's very much, I guess, promoted. Our land use change discussion is very much promoted as this either or at the moment. And I want to talk more about that later. But I think the other point we were trying to say in our future land use, it's not just about sheep, it's not just about forest, it's about how we optimize our land use overall within New Zealand. And that's what we were kind of thinking about in our future use of land study. So in that report, which is available for download, not available in all good bookshops, but you can download it from our website. What we were really looking at then is thinking about the current land use and value of production that we obtain from it, then moving on to think about why we need to change. Why is our current land use situation not sustainable? And there we think about the opportunities for us, growing middle class, increasing population, etc. But obviously the economic, social, and environmental challenges that we have with our system at the moment. I'm not going to go into those today. I think they're very well rehearsed. We have a profitability challenge in our sector. It's very uneven across the different elements of our agricultural sector. We have a productivity challenge that's very well discussed. And again, we need to think that the technologies that we're talking about today have a key role to play in that. And we have environmental challenges, both from climate change, but also our impact on emissions, our water quality issues, our loss of biodiversity, etc. And we're arguing in here that's the need for change. What I'm going to talk a little bit more about is actually what we did. Here in the work, we kind of first of all think about future in just terms of 4 general scenarios. They're really just to help us think about the sorts of changes that could occur. And so one scenario there was we were talking more about achieving our greenhouse gas targets, another about moving to a lower input dairy systems, then thinking about emergence of alternative protein to take some of our dairy market, and then following on from Kenneth's discussion about export expansion, if we're moving towards that doubling export, what does that do for our land use? And then in the report, we really think about possible future land use change and how will it be funded. And one of the things we wanted to do in there was really move from this general discussion. It's the Climate Change Commission. They say, oh, well, we have 30% reduction in this and X and Y, and these things will change. But how do we actually get that change funded? And we will see how we actually make that change happen was a key thing we were looking at it. So these were the 4 scenarios in a little bit more detail here that we're looking at. So first about meeting our reduction technique, 26% reduction in net farm carbon dioxide plus methane reduction. We then say in scenario 2, this alternative protein is that these alternative proteins take 20% of our dairy market. What then happens? The third one is we reduce nitrogen fertilizer application on our dairy system to move to a more generally extensive system. And then the fourth one is about doubling the value of New Zealand's exports. But a bit like Evan's saying, a lot of this can be the export enhancement can be achieved by inflation, adding value and prices. So we were just saying that 25% of this actually comes from revenue at the farm level, changes at the farm level. So, done a little bit of squash on here. Okay. And we can see here the land use changes at the overall scenario. So it's not come up really well on this. But we can see generally here, this is 0% change. So these areas are increasing, these areas are decreasing. And this is under our greenhouse gas reduction levels. And then this is the alternative dairy products coming in. This is our low input, and this is increased exports. Now, I don't need to spend too long on this. Clearly, what we're forecasting is changing land use. But really, what we're highlighting with from our grass to trees argument is under most of these scenarios, our sheep and beef sector gets under increased pressure. Okay, even if we're reducing the intensity of dairy, what we showed, for example, is a lower intensity dairy is still more profitable than many other land uses. So what it does is actually move into the extensive margin. We actually increase dairy area under that because we have a greater area of lower intensity dairy. But all this we can see here generally put sheep and beef pasture and extensive beef and sheep under pressure. So that's one of the points I just want to highlight. And we can look more closely at just the two extremes. We kind of say the two extremes are the doubling export approach and the entire focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And what we see here is the role that forests play in both. I think we can understand that forests play an important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions as they can be used to offset emissions and therefore we increase, but also in our models, given the profitability of forests, they actually play an important role in the doubling export process as well. So we can see the challenges here for our sheep and beef pasture against these other land uses as we go through. Now, I don't expect you to read every number on this table, right? But what we're trying to show here is we spent a lot of time looking at the wider implications of those scenarios. So we looked at land use, we looked at profitability, we looked at environmental outcomes of this. And really the simple message comes out from the top, right? Each scenario highlights trade-off. We did this analysis in a simple way. We're short of time and money. Fundamentally, we looked at it, comparing it to 2022 crisis, current technologies, etc. Right? So with our current technologies, our current systems, prices as they were then, we have trade-offs we have to face, right? If we go for reducing emissions, we will lose revenue, right? Our GPA from our agricultural sector will go down. If we go for pushing for export enhancement with our current systems, our current technologies, we're going to have environmental challenges, higher greenhouse gas emissions, worse water quality, environmental degradation, etc. Right? Our systems, as we have them now, give us trade-offs in this. We can't have a cake and eat it, right? And that's what this work really clearly highlighted in there. And we can see this summarized probably into this table. You know, if we go for greenhouse gas emissions, regionally, we can have reductions from 30% to 60%, but our full-time equivalent employment in the agri-food sector will decline, food and fiber sector. Our value added will decline, but our water quality linked to the reduction in greenhouse gases will improve. Okay, so again, those are some of the trade-offs. If we go to the other extreme, export intensification, our emissions will rise, we will have more employment, quite significant more employment in the agri-food sector. Our value added will go up, but our environmental issues will generally worsen in most regions, right? And that's one of the key scenarios findings from our work. And if we get more parochial about it, we can also see those trade-offs playing out in our region. Again, that employment trade-off with environmental trade-off there. So a fundamental challenge, I think, more generally for us, is that when we're thinking about land use, whether it's sheep and trees, whether it's dairy, whether it's grain and everything is that our systems are not taking account of the true costs and benefits associated with our land use choices, right? We're not taking about the benefits, biodiversity of certain systems or the costs in water quality of others. Therefore, we have a very skewed view of what is profitable land use in New Zealand and what optimization looks like. Because we don't have these things missing, we're making decisions with bad information, I would say, as Kenneth would say, because we're not taking account of the true costs and benefits. If we just look at the FAO, now these are figures that can be challenged, and I would happily spend a long time explaining why we could challenge them. But if we look at the FAO costs, the hidden costs of New Zealand food production, so these are negative externalities associated with our food production. Okay, they estimate there's about $22 billion of external costs associated with our food system that are not taken into account. Now, a large amount of this relates to our unhealthy dietary pattern, about 12 billion. This is US dollars, I should say, in here, purchasing parity. Okay, but if we look at environmental there's nearly 10 billion estimates of here, and that's just taking into account of climate, water, land, and nitrogen, not loss in biodiversity. So their estimate there is for every dollar of value our agricultural sector produces, there's 84 cents of hidden costs in New Zealand, right? Now, I'm not going to stand by that figure, right? I would not. A lot of assumptions have to be made for heroic figures like that. And again, I'm saying it's not even taking into account loss of biodiversity. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is these costs are real and they're very large. Right? So if we're not taking account of those, we're not making the right decisions, right, in inverted commas here, about our land use choices. So fundamentally, I think the challenge for us is accounting for these externalities when we're making these decisions, okay? If we don't take account, we're basically distorting the relative returns from land uses. Some may seem too profitable or not profitable enough. And so it's just a little example here. If we look at the current system, so the blue here is the return to the ecosystem manager, who might be the farmer, for example, okay? And that's what we're taking into account. The alternative is not as profitable, therefore it doesn't come into play, right? It could be dairy against beef or sheep or something like that, right? But if we take account here of the costs that aren't taken account in that production system, the impact on water, loss of biodiversity, emissions, etc., these are true costs that we should be taking into account, right? But our markets aren't capturing them. So here we have potential. If we took those costs in reality, we could make payments to the alternative system that actually makes it more profitable, and that we would be better off overall. But of course, our markets don't allow us to do that because we don't have the information, we don't have those markets set up. So in our report, we came out with 7 things we thought were going to change in our system over time. Or 7 things that could help reduce some of those trade-offs that we see in here. Okay, so diversification of farm systems and income from land that we've seen as important. You optimize use. I'm a bit reluctant with the word optimize. I've had a lot of discussions with ASB about this. They wanted the word optimized in there. Our argument is, what does optimization mean? I think we've probably all got a different view in this room about what optimized land use would actually look like, right? But the idea in this is really, if we think about every hectare on the farm, are we using that hectare to its best use, right? So are we, as Keith was saying in his recent article about sheep, are we planting trees on those unproductive plants, right? Are we using it for energy production where we could be? Those sorts of things we're looking at optimized. Then, of course, there's a huge area around the Maori estate and the land that they have. How can we help them grow value for that? This shift into horticulture production, the whole of part farm conversions. And again, there's a whole lot of issues, and we talk about these in the report. I haven't got time to go into those today. I think number 4 fits very closely with what we've been talking about this morning. Adoption of new approaches and technologies, smart farming technologies, are a critical enabler for optimization and transition of land use, both in terms of measurement, both in terms of genetic improvement, etc. And then the ones I really want to talk a bit more about are sort of around here are expansion of systems that have greater overall benefits. So these are the ones that kind of deal with more of those externalities that I've talked about, but have lower market returns and therefore are not fitting into our system. Regen ag might be an example of that, but again, if we're thinking even about the beef and sheep systems, we could be saying we're undervaluing some of the biodiversity benefits that we get with that, and silver fern pushing their nature positive thing when we see this sort of approach. So again, are we biased against sheep and beef because we're not taking account of these sorts of systems? And again, if we're going to tackle these environmental problems, we can do so much on a farm, but actually ecosystems don't stop at farm gates, right? Ecosystems work in catchments, in landscape areas. So we need to think about how we collaborate against that. And then also thinking about the added value aspect. I'm not going to talk too much about that. But the point we're trying to make, I think, is it all costs money. If we're going to transition our land use, finance is going to be needed in some way. Okay, and so we drew a little diagram about thinking about our flow of funding, where it's coming from, the government, public, financial banks, other private financial institutions, foreign direct investment, retained earnings, what instruments are we using, grants, debt, etc. How's it being used in the financial value chain? And we talk a lot about, I'm not going to go about here, about the role of foreign direct investment. I think we're seeing quite a lot of that in the last couple of weeks, with Dawn Meats taking over Reliance, selling off Anchor Butter, etc. And I think even Pick's peanut butter are just being bought by Australians. Not that we've got a great peanut industry here, but you know, the changes that are going on there. Lots of discussion about how we could use KiwiSaver funds more effectively for support this land use transition that we're looking at. Australia already have a higher proportion in private investments such as land, etc. We only have a very small proportion of our KiwiSaver funds invested in a way that actually may benefit our agricultural or our sector overall. And we've got industry talk more about this in a moment. But if we are going to transition, and those 7 things that we were talking about, they do create challenges for our financial markets, right? Generally, a transition involves often a high upfront cost. If we're thinking about moving to horticulture, for example, generally, you know, we've got examples in the report, very high investment required. Often those returns are delayed, could be 5, 6, 7 years while you're waiting for the return. Obviously, that then increases your risk, production and market in it. Okay, are the markets developed? Lots of production risk in that period. We also have those markets I'm talking about, biodiversity, water, etc., that are underdeveloped or missing. We need collaboration. Okay, so how do you finance collaboration? How does a bank deal with 7 farmers working together to do something rather than individual businesses? And if we're thinking about the Maori, where we've got different land ownerships, where's the security in the land? Okay, so there's many financial challenges that come from this transition. And obviously, we're getting more movement to these sustainability-linked finance approaches, whether it's loans, green bonds, etc. And maybe we'll hear more about those from the banks. So the final thing I really kind of want to talk about is, okay, let's think about the missing markets in particular. So can we develop markets in these areas? We're seeing a lot of a push for a biodiversity credit system at the moment. And here we have the idea, you know, you have your land use change, you actually validate the measure and validate the biodiversity change that can come from it, and you create a market in that value, okay? Now, clearly, our carbon markets are much more advanced, right? And again, what I'm going to say in a second is that that actually distorts our land use system, because we're valuing one of those ecosystem services, carbon, but we're not valuing a lot of the other ecosystem services that are associated with our land use. Therefore, we end up with radiata pine, focused on that, okay? And we're not taking account of other land uses that could give us other benefits in there, other types of forestry, other types of land use, okay? And we see, you know, the idea of government supporting a voluntary biodiversity market, we're getting to credits up, government role in here, thinking about, again, we talked about government role before, it's about setting the regulation right, it's about accreditation, and then letting the markets in. Now, I'm skeptical of voluntary markets, right? I think, yes, it can get so far, but I'm afraid I disagree probably with people before about the role of government. Government takes a longer term view. Markets do not take a longer term view. These land use changes are about what we want from our land in the future, right? How do we want our land to be used for value for New Zealand? The market is not going to give us that. It will give us some of these things, but the government needs to set the agenda to me about that and move us in that direction. Now, clearly, I mean, Australia's had a voluntary market going for a while. It's not moving very far. What's been used mainly for it is forests again, okay, about reforestation. But there's challenges in this that we need to overcome, and it's monitoring, again, the sensors technology here, it's scale, etc., that we need to do it. Who's going to pay for this? Interesting work's being done, showing how dependent different sectors are, industries are on ecosystem service provision. And if we look right through, again, it's done something slightly weird to my graph, but actually in this, of all those sectors, we're missing the one that's in the middle, this hasn't come out, which is food and fibre. So these are food and fibre businesses here. Yes, they are the most dependent and scaled 0 to 5 on ecosystem services, but there's a lot of other businesses, other sectors that are almost equally dependent. And so these are the ones we could think about in terms of funding ecosystem improvements through land use. If we come back to thinking about land use and land manager, this came from a diagram thinking about regenerative agriculture and who supports it. But I think we can think about this in more generally in about how we transition our land use. And what we're fundamentally saying, a bit of the role before when someone said everyone's involved, we need those who provide the finance, we need insurance, we need the food businesses, we need the land manager, government, etc., are all involved having roles in thinking about how we transition our land, okay? If we have these high upfront costs with uncertain returns, how does our finance markets deal with that, right? What do food businesses do in terms of paying a premium for products? You know, the Nestle's now, Mars paying premiums for products that meet their requirements more. How do we deal with insurance when we've suddenly moved from a very nice, easy product to insure, such as dairy, to volatile products, the cherries that one frost can lose you your whole harvest, right? We move to parametric insurance where you insure against changes, okay? So there's all roles to play in our food system. But I just want to finish, I've taken too long again on this point. It's not either or, and Keith wrote a very nice piece a week or so. I'm glad you were here. I was hoping you were going to be here so I could say this about, okay, forestry can be a big plus for sheep and beef farmers, but there are caveats, right? And I think also, you know, again, there's opportunity in forest if we've got this move from coal to biomass. At the moment, that biomass has been imported in wood chips, but I think forestry owners have their eye on that. And again, we've seen some challenges in it. But the point is what do we mean by forests, okay? There's farm forestry, agroforestry in here, but at the moment our system's biased against native forests, and the Parliamentary Commissioner at the Environment wrote a really interesting report in April highlighting that, right? We've got transition forests again, moving from starting out in commercial and then regenerating into native. We've got silvipastoral approaches, we've got food forest, okay? All these have a role to play. But the problem is our system, because of its focus on carbon, pushes us to radioactive pine systems. Okay, I won't go on. I'm using up my time. This is just an example from the olive press on the North Island, thinking about how you can grow olives in a silvipastoral system with beef and sheep. Right, so you can enhance the returns of beef and sheep, make it more attractive, but you can then also get your olives. And they've done some really interesting work about an olive is not just an olive. You can get all these products from your, so again, you raise the product up the value chain, increase the returns from olive, but you're also boosting the sheep and beef sector as well. And again, I won't spend long on this. Fundamentally, though, the point I'm keep trying to make here is we need balance, but our policy settings aren't right. They're not giving us this balance. And if the government has to put in a law that you can't change more than 25% of your land, to me, the signals are wrong somewhere along the line. You're then going to put policies to try and correct other things that are going on. And what's driving some of that is the ETS and the policies we have in place there, right? So why not reform the ETS to all have systems that reflect our true values of land rather than try to impose rigid rules at the other end, like no more than 25% of certain class land, because we know it's going to have a lot of unintended consequences, those sorts of policies. So just to finish, I think we've got land use change tensions. Our work has highlighted those trade-offs that we have in there, but we're not accounting for the true costs and benefits. The way that we can account for them is by different ways of working, different models of finance, different ways of valuing those costs and benefits. But there are rights, roles, and responsibilities from everyone involved in that sector in my diagram, right through from food retailers, farmers, government, etc., banks, insurance. And if we can get that better, then we can perhaps have a more balanced, optimized land use. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Next speaker is Rodney Smith from Rabobank, where Rodney is an agribusiness manager who looks after Central Canterbury. Rodney has a background in the farming sector, and he grew up on a mixed cropping farm at Sheffield, and is a Lincoln University graduate, having escaped in 1994 and had roles across the meat and fertilizer industries, and also spent times hands-on farming. He's been with Rabobank for 13 years, and he's, as part of that role, he's the regional representative for sustainability. So please join me in welcoming Rodney.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, quite an interesting topic because I don't believe that the banking sector and standard banking is really materially changed from the basics of banking fundamentals. But anyway, we like to keep all over adaptation, innovation, and what's happening, especially around sustainability. So look, we've got a, I'll just try to give a bit of an overview on how we're seeing adaptation, innovation, and some potential issues ahead, and actually celebrating some of the achievements we've made over time. And thanks, Alan, because you've actually covered a bit of what's happening in the background, especially some alternative funding sources. But I guess, yeah, some of the key messages are that banking fundamentals haven't changed. Farming has always continued to evolve and adapt. And actually, there has been some recent changes. There's been I'm not sure if you've been over it, but a recent inquiry into banking and competition. And some of the recommendations they've come out with, which were released within the last couple of days, could potentially lead to some changes around banking rules and regulations that might actually free up some capital and cost of capital, but we'll get to that as well. Interestingly enough, we've got a picture of a wind farm here, and obviously driven by some land use change and sustainability, and thinking of sustainable energy and generation. I'm not sure if any of you have seen a program that was on TV, a bit fictional, called Landman. It was based in the US around some people in the oil industry, and one of the characters there had quite an interesting take on the actual sustainability of especially wind generation. Anyway, so I guess this is a bit of a throwback. Farming, how it's evolved. We used to do things pretty simple and pretty basic, and through time we've had progress that's involved adaptation, innovation, increase in technology, and along the path of that there's obviously had to be some funding and innovation go into it. But first of all, on a positive note, the outlook for New Zealand food and agri is as buoyant as it has been for some time, and isn't it a great time to be part of the agri sector? We're at the forefront of New Zealand's export-led recovery with a touch to under 50 million in export revenue. And GDP ticking along, it's about 10%, and we actually provide about 12% of the nation's employment. There's a lot of global uncertainty and geopolitical conflicts around the world, but despite all of that and the ups and downs of trade tariffs and everything, we're seeing some really positive signs in markets. Milk payout predicted to be around $10 a kilo. Lamb has just hit $10 a kilo, and beef is very strong. And that's a welcome turnaround from some hard years. And the horticultural sector is leading the charge as well, with kiwi fruit growers and zestfruit surpassing 5 billion in global fruit sales. And I know not everyone's turned the corner, but look, I think we should all be proud of where ag is heading and what we've achieved to date. Backing up that, the latest Rabobank Rural Confidence Survey has net confidence still sitting up at plus 44%, which is the second highest in the past decade, which is great to see. But farmers and growers were never ones to rest on our laurels, and it's times like this with good returns when the industry is in a position of strength that we can look to the future and innovation and make some advances. A bit of historical context, and we've seen a bit of it today earlier. Land use has definitely changed. And if you think back in time, look in the 70s and 80s, sheep pretty much dominated New Zealand agri. Sheep numbers peaked at just over 70 million in the early 80s. And from that 70 million sheep, there was exports of sheep meat of around 400,000 tonne. If we wind that back to today, and based on 2024 statistics, sheep numbers have declined down to around 23 million. But from that decline, we've actually still managed to export close to 390,000 tonnes of sheep meat. That's quite a staggering result when you take into account it's only about 10,500 tonne less from 70 million sheep. We're 47 million sheep now, about what we're producing. And a lot of that's driven on the back of innovation and adaptation. There's some big drivers, obviously, at issue that we're seeing at play around land use change, and one of those is an environmental driver. And by this, I mean changing the carrying capacity of the land and changing land uses as consumer and regulatory expectations ebb and flow with climate change. Another aspect of this is the resilience factor in the face of a growing number of extreme weather events. Also think there's an external business environment, and with this I'm referring to the relentless businessification of farming. On a recent count, we've looked into it, and on average, a farmer has to be across about 36 acts, 47 regulations, and 17 codes of practice. Throw in the likes of anti-money laundering rules and regulations, hedging, tax, quality standards, employer obligations, and you suddenly feel nostalgic for when you just had to milk the cows and shift the sheep. And a number of these drivers do seem in conflict with the drive to increase export returns and feed a growing global population. I think New Zealand farmers and growers have demonstrated time and again over the years just how innovative and resilient they are. So back to banking and land use change. As I've indicated, the farming sector's gone through significant changes and will continue to do so. And we've definitely seen this here in Canterbury, with the increase of irrigation leading to significant land use change and productivity increase. And as other parts of the country, as Ellen just showed, there's been wholesale change from pastoral grazing to forestry, for better or worse. The key themes we're seeing coming across our plate at the moment are ongoing improvements in sustainability measures, greenhouse gas emissions, regulatory requirements around land use and water quality, and animal welfare. Another big issue on the horizon is the fact that more than half of the country's 33,470 farm and orchard owners will potentially retire within the next 10 years. As we've recently highlighted in a white paper that the Rabobank's put out on succession. Based on current land values, this upcoming changing of the guard is likely to be New Zealand agriculture's largest ever intergenerational change and transfer in wealth. It could directly involve at current land values alone. We're estimating at least 150 billion of property and farm assets over the next 10 years will somehow have to transition and change through into potential new ownership. All these issues will continue to mean some elements of land use change, innovation and diversification. And there will also be significant funding and borrowing requirements to facilitate this. As I indicated earlier, banking fundamentals that have supported these change haven't materially altered over time, and unless there is regulatory change, are not likely to moving forward. On an interesting note, the recommendations just released from the recent inquiry into banking competition could alter some of this. Some of the key takeouts from these recommendations are lowering the barriers to competition. Ironically, rural banking has never been as competitive as it is now for some time. A review of existing banking capital requirements, that's how much capital banks need to hold against loans, and especially the impact of this on rural lending. Acknowledgement that generational change in land ownership is going to be problematic under existing lending regulations. Amendments to the Overseas Investment Act and potential changes to the Overseas Investment Office. Acknowledgement that there is a lack of transparency regarding sustainable linked loans, and that reporting on climate-related exposure is both beneficial and burdensome. So it's going to be interesting to see if, when and how these recommendations are introduced. Essentially, getting back to the basics of banking, and I'm not trying to hopefully tell people how to suck eggs, and a lot of you probably already know it, but banks essentially look to support good operators with sound equity and financial performance. Of key importance is the ability to generate cash surpluses over a long-term projection. In terms of business change or diversification, we need to understand the cash flow impacts and timelines of how people's projected changes will take place. And importantly, the likelihood of successful profitability once these changes play out. It's especially important when new tech and farm system methods are being proposed with unproven results, as the capital outlay not always is reflected in a similar increase in security values. There's been a large increase in development of tech available, as we've seen, from drones, animal health tracking and tracing, e-fencing, GPS, to name a few. The technology has potential to accelerate on-farm improvements and efficiency. Key issues is the pace of adaptation and cost versus return compared with existing methods. In the initial adoption and progress of this tech, financing can be an issue until proven in terms of bottom line results. Over and above these basic fundamentals, banks are also interested in what's called the ESG aspects of farm businesses. This is becoming more of a focus, and this is referring to the environmental, social and governance aspects associated with the farm businesses that the banking sector supports. We try to have ongoing discussions with our clients focusing on how they build in climate resilience and what their plans are with how they will deal with evolving change. And a driver of these conversations is we're trying to build up our own internal modelling of potential funding requirements down the track of how some of these demands and initiatives will be funded. Some key issues or things we're seeing rising up at the moment around some things sustainable and everything is solar power generation, and this can vary from on-farm installations through to joint ventures with some energy companies to larger scale developments upwards of 50 to 100 plus hectares. There's other discussions develop around farm forestry and carbon farming. These are always, and also at the moment there's ongoing round of dairy conversions which have been off the off the radar for a number of years, and due to a gap in the window around regulatory requirements and approvals, there's, especially in central Canterbury, farmers are taking the opportunity to use the rules ahead of what could be potential change in regulations in another couple of years. The funding of that is always challenging at the moment. We tend to work through these discussions on a case-by-case basis, going back to the banking fundamentals of security and profitability, how it will be cost, how much it will cost, how it will be funded, and what is the likely cash flow to meet the debt servicing and profitability. Various banks and funders have different loan products available to meet these developments. They range from anything from sustainability linked loans, solar power loans, carbon loans, equipment finance, and ultimately increasing core debt. These all have different pluses and minuses, and ultimately uptake from farmers. Some of the requirements around the audit process and costs for sustainability linked loans, for example, have meant that the uptake's been quite low. And one of the initial supposed green sustainability linked loans is actually passed and not being renewed because the farming corporate involved at the time obviously didn't see benefit from what it was receiving at the other end. So whether that'll change over time, I'm not sure. Rabobank takes the approach, and has done since its inception, that our core loan product covers all bases and has been used for land use change, diversification, and ongoing improvements in sustainability. Essentially, you're rolling all your debt into one facility. You have flexibility of fixing short and long term. You can pay down drawn balances out of surplus cash flow and redraw it up to the limit as time progresses. So essentially, we take the view that we've actually been funding diversification and adaptation for a long time. Circling back to the basics of banking fundamentals, all of this lending still needs to meet those key criteria around security, viability, and profitability. When these plans and goals fall outside of the key lending fundamentals, there are other options available, and they can range from anything from family loans, equity partnerships, share farming, vendor loans, and finance companies, to name a few. And they'll all come with their own terms and conditions. I guess as the risk profile increases beyond normal banking criteria, the terms will no doubt come at a higher cost and possibly more strings. Outside of key lending, the banks are also involved in other activities around looking to support change, and especially climate change and diversification. A number of banks and other agribusiness companies, and along with the New Zealand government, have joined forces in a public-private partnership to form AgriZero. A number of you have probably heard of AgriZero. It's an initiative based and focused on investing in research and development to try and help solve some of the looming issues around farm emissions, especially livestock emissions, and looking at new technology on how some of these may be reduced. Outside of this, Rabobank, along with New Zealand government, are both key sponsors of the catchment communities Aotearoa. This is a national body established last year to act as a voice for approximately 200 plus local catchment groups throughout New Zealand. The group's mission is to champion sustainable land and water management through collaboration, innovation, and local leadership. And Rabobank's also run a number of financial skills workshops, freshwater workshops, and carbon workshops as a means to try and lift industry capacity and knowledge as well. So I guess in summary, this gives you some insight into how the banking sector, and especially Rabobank, is supporting innovation, land use change, and diversification. There are a number of loan products available, depending on how they meet banking criteria. And there's also options available for those outside of standard banking criteria. And I was thinking back to some of the big challenges ahead, and we've seen some of those earlier today. And I still think back to the looming farm succession issue coming up within 10 years on how we're going to transfer such a large amount of agricultural land. So I guess in summary, that's about me. For the banking's not the most exciting topic. And unfortunately, there hasn't been any real material change other than trying to meet standard banking criteria. It just comes down to the people, the property, and the performance. Any questions?
Well, thanks, Rodney. That's a great point. I'll ask Alan to come up as well, and we'll move into a time where the audience gets to ask questions. So I'd like to open the floor to anyone who has a question for Alan or Rodney.
I'd like to make a couple of points really and get a response to those. And the first point is a plea that those of us who are knowledgeable in these areas, we stop using the term CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalents, when we're talking about three gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. It always gets lost when pulled together as CO2e, that there's a fundamental assumption there that we're assuming that there is zero discount between years 1 and 100, and then at anything after year 100 does not count. It just doesn't matter. We don't care if the world is destroyed in 100 years. We need, when we're talking about emissions, to be separating out carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And as soon as we do separate those out, we can have intelligent discussions about each of them and how we can minimize those effects. I just want to make simply another point. It's a plea that we stop using GDP from agriculture as measured by Stats Department. Stats Department does not think that shearers are part of agriculture. It does not think that someone who makes hay or provides any contracting service, such as silage making, is part of agriculture. They all go into the service sector. The term agribusiness developed in the 1950s in the United States, and it was a recognition that we really need to be thinking in terms of the sector, which is the inputs, what actually happens on the farm and off the farm. Now, a hell of a lot of the decisions are determined on the farm as to how that system operates, but we have to think about a system. We can't really get cross with the common, with the wider community, misunderstanding the importance of agriculture if we keep feeding those statistics as constructed by Statistics Department. So I'd like to, I'd be interested in any comment back on that. Am I right or have I got it wrong?
In the second part, in our report, because a PhD student, Dan's working on contractors, we put in the figures for the service industries into the sector accounted in our, I didn't talk about GDP today, but in our report, they are counted and highlighted as an important component. So yeah, and I understand they are significant contributors. In terms of the measurement, yes, we were just working with what the requirement was to meet the legislation, and the legislation expressed it that way. So that's what we modelled in our report, and that's why we expressed it that way. And the methane is separate in terms of what we have to do with it. But I can understand your point. They are different, and we do need to be separating out and realizing the different contributions they make and the different ways we can deal with it. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, the point is that if you do the equivalence on 100 years, you get a totally different figure than if you do it on 20 years.
Yeah.
There's a time when that's important, and you get another totally different view if you use it on a 500-year equivalence, which actually says we think that getting the world to survive beyond 100 years it is important, and those value judgments get lost. Now, one of the great things of Hey Wakareke Noa, it failed overall, but it started to separate those three things out. And as agriculturalists, I think we have to be careful to make sure that they don't get lumbered back in together all the time.
Thank you.
I guess, well, personal take is you can't eat GDP, so is it really relevant? I mean, what are we earning as export returns? That money comes back into the country, that drives economic growth. GDP is just a measure that's bandied around, but you're correct, it obviously misses the beat on some aspects. In terms of emissions, just from I guess a personal and kind of banking perspective, we have ongoing discussions with clients, and no one really wants to get really excited or in-depthly discuss greenhouse gas emissions. It was like that was a thing we talked about a couple of years ago, and there's been a change of government, and now we're not so worried about it. But the problem hasn't gone away, and we do highlight that we can't put our head in the sands. I guess, and there's some farm business representatives and farmers in the room here, but from what I see and how I take it, until the measurement is perfected and evolves over time into more of a net measurement, not a gross measurement, it's probably going to be hard to gain a lot more acceptance from the farming community, who sees that they're not being recognised and rewarded for any parts of sequestration going on in their business. I might have that wrong, but that's just a personal observation.
If I could just add that Fonterra is bringing in a system now such that those farmers who are more efficient in terms of lower emissions will, in this current year, be receiving more money for their milk solids. And there's quite a lot of technologies that we do actually have that can reduce both methane and nitrous oxide. But you're right, the farming community in general has stepped back in the last 2 or 3 years because it's no longer top of mind in terms of issues they have to deal with.
That's a good point, actually, and it also highlights adapting to market signals and what Fonterra and some of the other meat processors are bubbling around with, and especially where Fonterra's landed, it is rewarding the better, more innovative producers that are focused on that. And I think, if anything, the carrot always works better than the stick. And growers and businesses will adapt to economic signals, and if that's the driver, regardless if they think that's great for the globe or the climate or whatever, that's an economic signal that they'll react to.
But this year, every Fonterra farmer will receive numbers as to what is their emission of methane per kilogram of milk solids.
Which is a great way of looking at it on an emissions intensity instead of overall high-level emission.
Session 3 of series today. Enabling innovation, people, policy, and digital infrastructure. In this section, we're exploring how people, connectivity, and digital platforms are enabling wide-scale adoption of agri-tech solutions. This session, we have two speakers, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Craig Trotter from Farm IQ. Craig has a background in ruminant nutrition and farm management consultancy, and has spent the last 15 years working with farming businesses to improve and sustain animal business performance, primarily by measuring and managing farm data. He's passionate about helping farmers create more efficient, productive and resilient farm businesses and using the power of Farm IQ and FarmX. He's also a lecturer of agricultural systems management at Lincoln University and teaches into the diploma degree farm management courses. So please join me in welcoming Craig for his talk, Harnessing Farm Management Software for Better Farm and Livestock Outcomes.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, folks, just an opportunity to talk about exactly Stuart said, harnessing sort of farm management software to try to improve farmer and livestock outcomes. And I'm going to talk from the perspective of the company I represent and I work for, and that is Farm IQ. And I'll have a chat about that in a moment, around what it is that Farm IQ does and where we've come from, because we've been around for a while, but we're starting to pick up at a pace now in terms of technology. But I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the opportunities for collaboration, the opportunities for partnership, and the opportunities for integration across farm system platforms and data platforms. And we are starting to pick up a bit of pace. You know, these days, the worm is turning in terms of companies willingly wanting to be able to share farmer stuff and allow farmers to exchange that data across model platforms. And I'll talk about that in this session. So, yeah, my role at Farm IQ, I'm the B2B channel specialist, and it's a funny term, but most of my role is working with other partner collaboration, other companies to be able to integrate with and create partnerships with and from a trust basis. And so my role is that political sphere in terms of trying to find opportunities for collaboration. And then once we've got the partnership in place, we can sign a few memorandums of understanding, and then I hand it off to the computer developers to try and talk code and try and develop some APIs and that sort of stuff. And so that's my role in this regard. I've been a farm consultant in the past, and for the last 5 years, I've been at Farm IQ and involved in this sort of role going forward. And as we said before, I also teach into farm management here at university as well. So Farm IQ Systems is a company that's been around for the better part of 15 years. And so we are one company, but with this today, we have two of our main products. And so they are Farm IQ, the product, then FarmX as well, which is a different product that we have in terms of the software program that we have. I like to think about it in regards to Farm IQ is today looking back. So it's a platform where you or farmers can record all their farm activities. And so if they move a mob of stock, they can record that. If they drench that stock, they can record that. If they apply fertilizer or chemical onto their land, they can record all of that information. If they've got health and safety policies, if all of that information can be recorded on that platform. So it's from today looking backwards. Versus FarmX, which is our other product, is a farm modeling software. And so it's about today looking forward. And so I can create a digital twin of my farm on a software basis and look at it, what if scenarios. What if, like we're experiencing in the Waikato at the moment, we're getting very poor pasture growth across a lot of those dairy farms. What if pasture covers aren't recovering where they need to be? What is the implications on that in terms of the amount of supplementary feed I may have to put into my dairy bird? What if I'm farming in North Canterbury and we do get some good rain in January? That means I'm going to have a lot of feed in February, March. How many store lambs might I be able to buy? And so it's a what if scenario testing tool in that framework. We have desktop and mobile applications, and for all intents and purposes for this presentation, I want to talk mostly about Farm IQ in terms of the software that we provide for that one. We are owned by the industry, and we are for the industry, and so they are our shareholders as it stands today. As it stands today, Palmer are a majority shareholder currently, but they are the main shareholders within the enterprise. And I've got a couple of screenshots just of FarmIQ, and this is one of them where we are a map-based software company. And so from this one, I can see my farm here, I can see my paddocks, I can see where my mobs of stock are. And so this is the desktop version, but I can record all my stock activities, I can record my fertilizer, my chemical applications, I can see all those activities on my farm. Like I said before, I can record my health safety interactions. I can record my livestock weights, whatever that might be, on the platform. And this is here the calendar view in terms of some of the activities that we can see on farms. And so this is just by security reasons, really important to know where your mobs of stock are on your farm. I can record pre-grazing and pasture covers. I can record animal health treatments and tasks ahead going forward as well. I can record what deaths or sales that I have on my farm, and so therefore I have an accurate stock reconciliation and a good understanding of the historical events that have been occurring on my property going forward. And so I wanted to sort of move things around a wee bit in terms of some of the things that we're working towards trying to achieve with FarmIQ. And so going back to sort of first principles, thinking about why do farmers record their activities and recording the history of farms. And many of us may come from farming backgrounds and for long established farming families, and we've got diaries at home from the 1890 or the 1920s of farmers getting home at night and recording all those on-farm activities and the weather and the climate data and all the information that they have. And so that is one reason why we might be interested to record some of those activities. Hopefully we are all on a journey of continuous improvement. And so from a farmer's perspective, to try to increase the performance and the efficiency of those farming systems. Increasingly, to a certain degree, we have assurance and regulation schemes in place, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of those things today. But we work very closely with some partners around assurance schemes, and so the red meat industry has New Zealand Farm Assurance Plan, has been operating for a few years. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to release a product to allow farmers to more efficiently record those activities that they need to keep in terms of the requirements in regards to the New Zealand Farm Assurance Plan. Synlait is one of our most proud partners, enduring partnerships, and we built Levified Live for Synlait. And so it's been a really positive thing as well for us in terms of a digital solution to recording the farm insurance plans. Gradually, we are moving towards adoption of technology and software solutions to record a lot of these activities on farms. You wouldn't believe how complicated the world of farm management software is. And I could probably list 10 to 15 different companies that exist globally. It's probably 10 in New Zealand in terms of different privately owned companies like FarmIQ that are all in this game of farm management software. It's a very competitive, very cluttered space, but it is the way we see things today. So, trying to understand why farmers record some of those activities. I'm sure we'll talk about this as the day progresses, and this has been a really major challenge that we have seen across the industry over time, where there's different silos of farm data spread across multiple platforms. And one of those God's honest truth frustrations that farmers have had is that different companies come down their driveway and ask for the same bloody information. And we know those stories, and it has been a real challenge, particularly across the agricultural, agribusiness and horticultural business industries. historically there has been limited willingness and ability to share some of that. And that's my role at Farm IQ in terms of trying to coerce companies to be able to open up and share some of that data. And God's honest truth, it's got a lot easier. Probably in the last 2 years, and even the last 6 months, we're seeing some really significant change, particularly from the big players. Keith, you mentioned Fonterra. They've really opened themselves up to be able to integrate with companies, and it's changed the game in that regard. And so, openness and willingness of companies to share farmers' data. One of the big challenges is who owns that data, and that has been one of the challenges that we have had historically in terms of some of those companies thinking that they own the data on behalf of the farmers, which is rubbish, but it has been historically one of the challenges. But that's evolving and changing through time as well. Slowly, we have had an evolution of companies' willingness to share the farmers' data, and for all intents and purposes, Farm IQ makes that very clear. It is the farmers willing to share their data across from their trusted suppliers within the Farm IQ ecosystem, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. So as it stands, this is what we have built today in terms of Farm IQ. We have what we're calling the Farm IQ integration ecosystem. And so we're trying to collaborate, work with partnering businesses to be able for farmers to share their data from their trusted partners. Doesn't need to be everybody. We can see a couple, did notice a couple of our strongest partners are here today, Mark from Simlay, and just a couple here from Mapabag as well. They have been through with us thick and thin over many years in terms of integrations and collaborating and partnership across this ecosystem of relationships that we have gradually built. And so increasingly we are building this ecosystem through API integrations via the cloud, and many of the companies are moving into this space now. We will not reinvent the wheel. No, we do not want to build software that's already built. We would much rather share and integrate the data from other providers across the ecosystem that we have built today. And so, the wonderful thing is with it is that a farmer might supply Synlait, absolutely. They might weigh their cows through walkover weighing, through Gallagher systems, and then they might send their cull cows to Silver Fern Farms. They can actively choose which of those partners that they want to share their data with. And that's the beautiful thing about it in that regard, where we want to the farmers can select, yes, Synlait is one of my trusted partners. Ansco is one of my trusted partners. A farmer might have a harvest weather station and they might record their pasture covers through the GenQuip. We have an integration with that now. Then they might supply Westland or Open Country milk, or they can feed that data into a CDAX unit as well, and have that pasture record information flow through into Farm IQ. Yeah. Some of and as I was saying before, some of the changes, all the solid lines are basically the integration that we have today. And there are a few dotted lines, as you can see, LIC, Precision, and potentially Hawkeye, Overseer. Some of those integrations, we're having useful conversations, but we're still not, we have to build the code, build the integration opportunities. But the companies just said, yes, we accept the challenge to be able to integrate some of that farmers' data, and hopefully we'll move into a space where it's successful. We don't play favourites, and if the farmers want it and it's possible and financially viable to do so, we'll work with those partners and build that integration. And so you can see here that Silverfern Farms and Scone Alliance, they are businesses where we can share kill sheet information. Milk production, Stinley, Fonterra, Baraka, OCD, Westland, we all have agreements that to be able to share those farmers' data depending on what supply company that they operate with. Same thing with Gallagher, True Test, or Tapari. Again, what weighing system do the farmers use? If they use Gallagher gear, they can hook the integration up. If they use Tapari gear, they can hook the integration up. And soon we'll have a cloud integration with True Test as well, but just they're not quite there yet. And so what does it look like in terms of this data? So this, I've just got some screenshots directly out of FarmIQ of milk data or data being fed directly into the platform. And so I was mentioning before around farmers recording that information, but increasingly, and hopefully the case is, we're reducing the amount of work that farmers need to do. If they allow for these integrations to occur, they don't have to do a damn thing. It just happens by magic. And so I've just taken some screenshots from different suppliers that we have or farms that we have. And so here's a pickup from Sinlay on the 11th of August, and here's a pickup from Fonterra in terms of two different farms receiving that milk feed integration. Weighing events as well. And so increasingly we've got, and these are just weighing events that farmers have recorded, whether that be on Gallagher or that be on Tapari weighing equipment. We can see that the weights here, the EIDs, all of that information, EID information seamlessly flows through into FarmIQ. So the farmers can sort of manage the stock on the platform as a consequence of that. Animal health and chemical spraying events as well. And so increasingly we are seeing farmers record animal health events through their Gallagher or Tapari or Database software systems. And so we've said, yeah, we can feed that information into FarmIQ as well. And so this is an animal health event of a farm being reported, 144 stags recording Exodus Drench, 1% injectable, that information feeding directly across into FarmIQ. And so farmer just records that information in Gallagher, it feeds across into FarmIQ, and therefore, for the purpose of an insurance planning, let's say, that information is sitting in the system ready to go and be ready for the auditor in terms of the NZFFE audits or whatever might be required at that point. Another integration that we have is with Tabular, formerly known as TrackMap. And so they are one of the bigger players in regards to precision reporting information on farms. And so a lot of contractors have Tabular. And so if the contractor has Tabular and they do the work on our farms that utilise FarmIQ, all of that fertiliser data and chemical information flow through directly onto the platform. And so this is just some chemical proof and placement lines that you can see here of some of that data that we have going. And another big player, precision farming, is another big player. And just recently, we've agreed in principle that yes, we will look under each of these hoods and see if we can get an integration to occur. And fingers crossed, we should be able to do so because we've done it already with Tabular. Kill sheet information as well in terms of when farmers send their stock to slaughter, they get the kill sheet information. And so it's a breakdown of the performance of the carcass characteristics that those livestock kill at. And so within farms and ANSCO, that information feeds directly automatically into FarmIQ. And it will also take your stock off your stock reconciliation as well, if you so wanted. Mentioned before, GenQuip have a fancy plate meter with a Bluetooth functionality, and these days we've had a very ongoing relationship with GenQuip, but we've rebuilt the API and it's working again now, which is really good. And so, yeah, farmers are actively springtime, recording the pasture covers on their properties. That information is directly feeding into Farmer Q. Another space that we are moving to is around dashboard reporting as well. And so we can create those integrations, and then now we can start to get a bit more insight into what that information means on a farm basis. And so this is a red meat example where I've got, and this is data feeding in from Farmer Q and FarmX. And so, like I said before, Farmer Q is about from today looking back. And so I can record my pasture covers, and that works out what the growth rates are. And so I've got the solid line here in terms of what's my actual supply of feed or pasture growth, but then FarmX is predicting what's going to happen into the future. And so we're looking to integrate the two platforms together increasingly. I can look at it in terms of the pasture cover side of things, production efficiency, and then greenhouse gas emissions as well. Keith, we do have CO2 equivalents, but we have a breakdown here as well of methane as well. So, yeah, what we're looking to do around that, Keith, is build out, as Fonterra and many other milk processors have done similar as well, around embedded emissions. And so it's another conversation for another day, but that seems to be the talking point these days. By all means, FarmX is a product that can generate, understand the greenhouse gas emissions for your properties, and so you can record that information as well. And same thing on the dairy side of things. And so having a dashboard of information that's available that populates itself really is what we're hopefully sort of working towards, within reason in terms of what we're trying to do and achieve. Opportunities to integrate LIC. Again, we've got some opportunities to integrate some data between ourselves and LIC. That'll be another significant gain for many producers. What are we trying to do next in terms of what do we want to do and achieve? We're looking to try to bring on more integration partners. And as I said before, it is getting easier these days. Companies, it's the game that I largely play, where a lot of companies, they're not saying no anymore. They're saying they either go yes, but not right now, or they say yes, and let's have another meeting in 2 weeks. And so that's really in terms of those opportunities that we have available to us across the industry in terms of being able to share farmers' data. And so, in the past, many of the big players just said no, but they're not saying no so much anymore. Yes, but not right now, which is fair enough too, depending on where many of those companies are and have been. As we all know, the agribusiness industries largely have done it pretty hard over the last few years. But just as we were mentioning before, red meat's up, dairy's up. Those farmers' opportunities are looking good, but also to a degree, many of those processors also will have money to reinvest back into their own digital platforms, which means that they can build some opportunity to integrate, build some code and some tech to be able to more efficiently integrate some of those data. We are about reducing farmer time commitments to record, and it just happens by magic. And that's hopefully what we're trying to work towards. Working really closely with our partners such as Synlay in terms of trying to simplify that farm data recording to try and make it so much easier for farmers to record their activities, predominantly for farm insurance, but ultimately to make sure that their performance and production is getting better. Like everybody else, we're moving into the AI space, and so FarmIQ is a god-awful amount of data over the last 15 years that no one's really looked at properly, and we're going to start using a bit of AI to dig a bit deeper into that understanding of we have about 5,500 users across the country. So there's a lot of data there, a lot of potential to think about making more insights and improving our reporting functionality through AI. And if anyone's keen, I'm around for the morning. I'll have to shoot off to another conference in town today, but yeah, I'm around over lunchtime to have a catch up if anyone's keen to talk about opportunities to integrate and collaborate and form partnerships to allow farmers to exchange their data on something like Q platforms. Well, thank you very much.
It's great. So our final speaker for today is Professor Don Kulasari, an internationally recognised researcher in computational and mathematical biology and environmental modelling. And his talk is AI in farming, opportunities and challenges. So can you join me to welcome Don?
Thank you very much, Stuart. And I'm going to go through this in a very rapid pace because there's a lot of things I put together without realizing it's only 20 minutes. Just look me. By the way, I'm Don Kulasari. Don doesn't stand for Donald, this is the Portuguese name. So I just wanted to correct it. And Glenn is one of my, as we say, mates, and a professor in the University of Georgia who leads this program I'm going to talk about in the first part of the talk. And my role is basically looking at the mathematics modeling and all these cool stuff that some of these computing geeks are very excited about. And Dan and I have a long history of collaborating. I mean, we did our master's and PhD in Virginia Tech. If you have heard of Virginia Tech, it used to be MIT in South, but Georgia Tech has actually taken us down. But we actually innovated two things. One of these things is this vast hound, which is actually based on a vast ability to sense very small chemical compounds, minute scale. And we did this for about 10 years. And now these technologies, I heard the last time that it's being used by an aerospace company in Florida, using electronic noses instead of WASP. And what I did, do I have a lesson? Is it? Yeah. That one? Yeah, I did this part here. Actually, I had a master's in PhD students, which Glenn and his technicians upload the data and we downloaded. Those days it was actually not GitHub. And did that for a few years and then we published the papers. And then I think the university sold this thing to Barnett Aerospace eventually. Anyway, now we have been talking a lot about robotics because I'm an engineer. I mean, we both did masters and PhDs in engineering in Virginia Tech in the same department, working around things and developing things. So we continued our conversation, and now we come to this stage that Glenn got a hugely federal funded program with integrating AI, robotics, data, simulated modeling. In farming, we have actually very large farm, 90 acres, and 40 acres are pivoted. And we have pivoted means we have all these rotations. You name it, we have it. We can talk about it. And 90 acres, like I said, mainly focus on cotton. By the way, University of Georgia in Clifton campus genetically modified the cotton plant. I'm not going to talk about that, it's illegal here. So to be a really nice cool thing, and robotic small machines can go and harvest them. Okay. And what we are trying to do here is basically give farmers, and farmers are involved in this program. In Georgia, this is a federal funded now since last year. Farming communities are with us, with them. I'm just a scientific advisor to them because I'm a New Zealander, so I can't be, the Trump is a bit nervous about foreigners coming and working with them. So we try to come up with a decision support system for the farmers in the state of Georgia, because we are funded by the senators and all these politicians. And it's a big project with 18 PIs now, right across the Georgia and Florida. So, and this is the farm, and we have two big buildings. One is data hardware building, which we have all the computers. Other is the brain building. We call it the people working with the data. Okay, so it's somewhere here. And what I'm involved in with Glenn. Glenn is very much into the engineering and computing side of things. Get the data, extract the data, and then predictions and forecasts. I mean, this is a very ambitious project going to be around 10 years in time. And mainly we want to actually, to be honest, tackle the weather. How the profitability be affected by two things. One is the weather, other is the labor market in those part of the world, right? May not be here. And we want to help the farmers. End of the day, farmers will have a computer in front of them, they can make decisions. And there are a lot of machine learning, AI coming into the picture. I don't have to go through this, but I'm going to give a talk in CISP seminar series Thursday, which I will go through some of the gory details of some of these things. And here's what we are going to have. And for last few years, we are going to have, we were collecting a lot of data. Remember, 18 PIs with so many different groups of people are working here. And the biggest challenge we are facing right now is actually this diversity and the heterogeneity of the data. I mean, from satellites, for example, we got this low resolution satellite images, which we are now negotiating with Google satellite to get it to a high resolution, because we need the small 1,000 acre, 500 acre blocks. And then all the other data have so many different problems. Images, some are soil data, some are heterogeneity is the biggest problem we are trying to deal, but different groups are collecting the data. And here's a robotic thing, and this is without the harvesting part of the cotton. They developed that. This is Glenn's workshop over there. I visited there a couple of times. Huge workshop. We always work within the workshop, even though I'm computing, and Max guy more into that, but he was more into the machinery things. And we have this huge workshop, which we can make anything out of it. So we have robotics, and these are very specialized cameras. We try to get some data. And then we have this, I mean, without drones, everybody talking about drones, we do have very automated and going and collecting automatically couple of weeks, couple of days in a week, and these data. So we go. Now here we go. And this is what we are collecting. Okay. And all kinds of data coming in different frequencies, parameters, why not? So if anybody interested in working with us, let us know. Now this is the big picture where we are going to extract, transform, and load. That means store in our databases. And that's going on right now. Actually, the real project started last year. I have a PhD student right now from here working with them, the mathematician doing PhD mathematics, doing the second PhD. So here we go. This is I put this thing in data assimilation because it's heavily challenging mathematically. What we are trying to do is take these physiological models, because the reason why we are working this way, because there's whole raft of physiological models in University of Florida. About 40 crops are being there. It's available. And what we have, and all kinds of models, what we want to assimilate, not just to plug in things to the model, but actually algorithmically change the models so that we can have machine learning data being fed into the models and calculating people while they're solving the especially partial differential equations and differential equations. Okay. And we are not alone here. There's few groups, and Professor Abernell last year published a paper, not a paper, book, which deals with atmospheric physics, because they have to bring in all this data for weather predictions. And that's a theory book. So what I'm keen to do, this is my baby, if you like. And what the whole project is trying to do is to bring the economics into it. There are groups of economics actually working with the project. The reason is that we need to give information to farmers, especially for hurricanes and flash flooding events, what they could do to reduce the losses. Okay, that's our vision. In 3-4 years' time, we have a platform which we will be able to do it. As you say. And by the way, big people are talking to the project. Microsoft has a team now to help us put together Azure Lambda architecture. Because this is a cool project so that they can innovate things for farming. Because farming, as you know, I mean, some of the billionaires have the biggest farms in America. Okay. Farming is going to be the innovating hub for AI. And it will be changed. I mean, Microsoft and Google are working at this project. Okay. So that's a brief thing. I think I have how many minutes more? Minutes? 10. Okay. Now I'm going to bring it down to a simpler context. In New Zealand, we have and this is a really cool piece of work Microsoft is going to do for us. And they're going to have the separate servers for us, okay, eventually. So what I'm going to do, talk about the piece of work we finished in 2024 with MBI funded and Bragata, actually through Bragata. We had this Pinot project for 5 years, and I was the PI for machine learning and modeling. And in the COVID time, I couldn't bring any expertise from overseas, so I had to use my own PhD so part-time to do this. But we did a pretty interesting thing. I'm going to show you a few things, but I'm going to go through this pretty fast because there's quite a bit of technology in all this. And this is the framework, basically. I mean, you won't believe this. If I tell you now, I know some of my colleagues here, Woody is not here. He used to think AI is a passing phase. I'm going to tell you it's not going to. 5 years time, farming will be changed. I don't know about New Zealand, it will be in at least in USA. And this is what the basic framework I proposed to the program. And what we did was this pipeline, implement this pipeline and include the viticulture practices over to this. And expert judgments coming from Wendy Parrish. Wendy Parrish is a you probably know her, did a really good discipline on wine quality. She's retired now. We had actually a lot of work from her in the program. And what we did was, the first part of that is we have this chemistry data coming in from our laboratory here. Ken Olita, an American postdoc, did that, physiochemical data. And then we developed the machine learning pipelines and then the mathematical framework, and then compared with the expert judgments. I mean, nobody actually, winemakers wouldn't believe it here. We could do that. We could actually take quantitative measurements compared with the quality. Okay? So this is the kind of a thing we graphics of this, and we have very low samples because it's very expensive. As you know, data is expensive, by the way. You know, even in Georgia project, getting data is very expensive because you need to have satellites. Satellites are expensive. Some of the dedicated. If you have a dedicated satellite, that's expensive. Okay, so data is expensive. So we had to actually expand the database using algorithms like SMART. Some of you have that, what we call balancing, data balancing, and we did that. And by the way, this is the mathematics. This is the role of mathematics, actually. What we did was we had so many features we need to bring in. So what I used was, engineers use that forever, Buckingham Pi theorem. I mean, you probably heard of Reynolds number, which is a indicator in fluid mechanics of the turbulence of the, and same idea, we actually use that to reduce all these huge variable, features using the Buckingham Pi theorem and getting what we call essential modulators, 5 of them. And we reduce that to 4 eventually. And then we relate that mathematically to the quality. And that work went on. And now I'm not going to explain this, some of these things. And then we have a reasonable, these are some of the algorithm discussion about the algorithms. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, we could actually detect premiums for the universal in commercial things. And we were pretty reasonable. Given that we have a very small database and all that stuff, and then we thought because our program had viticulture, Damien Martin, like people in plant and food, we expanded that to viticulture to see what happens. And that went on. We actually reduced the wine quality things to 4. And Damien Martin, the plant and food, had a huge program within that program to collect all the data, what we need, and they were good enough to give us that data. And then we have this data collected. And by the way, this is the pipeline eventually we developed. And this pipeline, you can get everything in between and at the end. And we developed this. I was lucky to have 2 computer engineers working for PhD with me. One is working for computing group now. Another one is with the space department to do this. And this is the pipeline, graphics of pipeline. And if you know explainable AI, one of the branches of AI which we use shape parameters to look at and see whether what features or the parameters are going to be very important. So we did all that. And also not only that, we created a web application which is you can access that and you can play with the numbers and see what happens to your wine quality. Okay. Now, I think I'm on time. Yeah. Good. And I mean, I'm an academic. I like to I published 3 papers. Last one came out last year. Actually, yes. And this third one is getting cited mostly in Europe and my Californian people. Some people want to know what's going on. So if you want to know more about it, here's the papers. Every detail you can implement whatever we did using these 3 papers. Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm on time.
Thank you, Don. Would you like to stay up and Craig, would you like to come back up? And we've got time to take some questions from the audience here for either Craig or Don. Would you?
Thank you so much. We have heard a lot about the sensor data. I have one question, which is we discussed about it in break as well. Who will own this data, and who will use it? Who will?
Because this is you mean I took it to me.
You and Farm IQ as well. You collect a lot of data from farmers, and anybody can access those data as well.
I mean, the program I'm working with in Georgia, the federal funded program, anybody can access it. You can use it. I mean, if you have collected, you can use it.
How about the Farm IQ? When you collect data from farmers, who own the data and who can access it? The reason I ask, because after then there is a big question about the cyber security. We've done a project here at Lincoln, and the result was concerning about the cyber security on farms in New Zealand. When we're collecting data and put a lot of sensor on the farm and farmers, push farmers to use this sort of application, always there is a big concern that the third party can access and use data for commercial or other with national security as well.
Yeah, totally. No, in our regard, it's the farmers' data, and so what we are building is an ability for farmers to share whoever they want to share that information with, and so we'll build those integrations like we had on that ecosystem. But then they just pick and choose. I supply ANSCO, or I supply Synlait, or I get my fertilizer records from Tabular, and so they can pick and choose that information. And so, but we are a SaaS company, and so we're out there in the industry, and we get tested every day by White Knights and everything else. Our data is on AWS, but that's about as far as I can tell you that. But in terms of data security, we regularly, I think quarterly at least anyway, we get people to try to break into PharmaQ and work their way in. But in that regard, though, if farmers can turn on or off those integrations as they choose to do so.
Yeah, I think one thing I need to tell you, if you look at the genetic data, I mean, in 1980s of the Congress, if you are doing federally funded work, collecting the data, it should be available to all over the world. That's why we have medical industry progressing. We have the same idea with this Georgia project. If farmers want to get used to working with the federal funding program, providing, there are lots of farmers interacting. If they want to do that, they have to agree that whatever their data should be available to anybody around the world. So we are working with Tanzanians, different people. So if you want to, you may not have all the data you want, but talk to me and I'll bring that data to come to you. That's okay. Because the reason, philosophy behind this is we can't do AI in farming just in one country. We need to collaborate right across, share the data right across. Otherwise, this won't work.
Another question, just over here.
a question mostly for Craig. So you've got this network of mostly commercial partners, and I think Farm Max within some modelling in house to try and sort of leverage that, I suppose. Do you have agreements with the research community, with academics, CRIs, anything like that?
Yeah, the CRI is definitely AgriSearch is a shareholder in Farm IQ. So, but it's something we need to build out a lot more. Like our focus is on the commercial realities of building a product that farmers want to pay to use, and so that is our predominant sort of focus in terms of where we're trying to get more customers and trying to do that. But most certainly we work really closely with AgriSearch because they are shareholders. But we FarmX has over 1 million files now from the old days, and some of you might know it from stockpile days way back, and so there's a god awful amount of data there which has never really been blown the dust off it, and so there's some opportunities to do so. Yeah.
Okay, and back. So you mentioned earlier about, and you're kind of just touching it on it again, there's probably enormous opportunity to dig back into that old data and apply AI and machine learning. Do you or does Farm IQ have a sense of what sort of questions they're wanting to answer with that, or is that the conversation to be had still?
Yeah, I think so. Like we haven't, even within the Farm IQ data, we've been reporting animal health events of farmers just reporting it, themselves for the past 15 odd years, and so there's a lot of data just around disease incidents and so yeah, there are some frameworks to work through around anonymizing that data, but I think in principle we do potentially could utilize that for the industry. If we've chatted into AgriSearch and MPI and others, but there is that careful dissimulation we need to make between whose data is it and how much of it we can share, because we're very clear that it's the farmer's data, but we can anonymize elements of it to be able to be of benefit for the industry. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but even FarmX is a good one. Like, we've built out the greenhouse gas functionality within the FarmX in the last sort of 5 years, but we can pull those algorithms across those files that were built back in the 80s, and so there potentially some really fun stuff to look at there, but looking to try and achieve that.
Great. Does FarmX and Farm IQ integrate data platforms from the machinery manufacturers like John Deere Operations Centre and Trimble and things?
Getting closer, yeah. Not right now.
Right.
Yeah, not right now. We do have that integration with Tabular. We'll get one pretty soon, hopefully, with precision farming, and so they integrate with John Deere, and so there might be a three-way type of thing there. But they tell me that John Deere's got some open APIs available, and so I noticed that the company in just the last couple of weeks we've been thinking, well, why don't we just hook into them directly? They put the potential to do so, but not currently.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, it's good.
Another question. Just wondering, well, apply to both, but with the integration of different, all these different platforms that you're working with, do you end up with a system that ends up being rather more prescriptive, or does it kind of go back to what Alan was talking about earlier, where you've got scenarios opening up that farmers can say, well, it might not be a totally profit-driven motive. It might be, I want to be a good farmer, but I want to be good for the environment, or all these types of considerations. So I was just wondering, is there a danger that everything's maximised to productivity or profit? And so the farmer says, let's go down, there's only one way to go here, or are we open to scenarios here? And the same thing with winemaking. Winemaking can be quite subjective. What do you think is a great wine might not be what somebody else thinks is a great wine. So how do you put that flexibility into the system?
I think we thought about that. If you look at this system we develop, it's quite like you can adapt to different variants if you like, if you keen to it. And that's there in the system. And to answer the first question, if you don't mind, it depends how we integrate the systems. It's possible to be very flexible these days. I mean, you have legacy systems That's where the problem is. And then bringing in new technology to integrate with them. It's just like we are facing this in this project. One of my students right now dealing with QGIS platform and PyTorch platform, try to connect them with a plugin. There are issues like that, so that's why integration is not that simple. But if you design it from the very beginning to be flexible, it should be possible. But from now on, I think we actually in the AI world, and all these people doing that, and it should be possible.
FarmMax is a tool to model out those different scenarios, and so it is. I said before, the farm management software is a very complicated place, and it is. But FarmMax is largely on its own in terms of a modelling software that can measure the biological feasibility of a farm system, and it is as simple as computer says no. You know, where this is what you're wanting to achieve, the scenario you're trying to build based on your farm, your rainfall, your pasture growth data. Computer says no, this is not biologically feasible, and so therefore you can apply a financial lens to that as well. And so FarmMax is a modelling software, has that financial biological sort of symmetry to try to blend in that modelling side of things and to look at the biological feasibility and to understand pressures on the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and then nitrogen balance, not nitrate leaching, because that's overseas space, but we have a nitrogen balance tool or component report in it as well. But the greenhouse gas emissions is where a lot of us are going, because we've commented before, where the market's taking the industry big time. So,
and I've seen in the past where, I've seen models that can justify, doubling the amount of phosphorus fertilizer you put on, because it'll give you 1 or 2%. And if the price is good enough, you can justify doing that. But from an environmental or biological point of view of the consequences of doing that, you can't really justify it. But if everything is just put into profitable production, then you kind of sometimes you lose that, the ability to finesse that out. So, but that's an extreme example. But yes, you'd like to think that you've got farmers who are as varied as any other part of the population, and they're going to have different objectives, I guess.
A big user base of FarmMax are consultants, and so they'd probably be half or more now in terms of working with clients to work out systems feasibility.
A few more questions, Lady Emery.
Is there a benchmarking capacity within FarmX for, say, individual farmers or industries that are part of FarmX? Because that would require farmers to make their data available.
Yes, there is. In a private capacity, we have what we call dairy systems monitoring. So we've built that in conjunction with McFarlane Rural Business and Baker Rack. So it's probably two of the bigger farm consultancy businesses within New Zealand. In a dairy space, there's around 250 farms now that have a benchmarking function using FarmX. And so inputting monthly performance, production characteristics, costs associated with that, and then benchmarking that across those private consultancy firms. Yeah,
just those firms. So what about something like Dairy Base?
Definitely, if there's a difference there where Dairy Base is sort of once a year in terms of reporting, and so where we see the difference in terms of Dairy Base is fantastic, but it's about what happened last season versus what we've tried to build in a private firm in association with consultancy firms is to use that functionality of FarmX. Okay, this is what happens this month. How does that play out? What's going to happen next month? So no, by all means, we do have that, but in a private consultancy firm basis.
Yeah, just about the integration with all the companies. Are they quite difficult to maintain those integrations over time? Because I'd imagine if one company kind of changes their a variable name or just something small, then it can be
Which it is, and we are moving now, and you'll have to forgive me for any of the devs in the room, but it is moving to API cloud-based integrations now, where we've had integrations like Bluetooth integrations with if someone had a true test weighing platform or a Gallagher weighing platform, you can still do it in terms of a Bluetooth integration with your Farm IQ app into that. To the machine, but that's exactly the problem. Every 6 months, one of us updates our code, and then the connection shuts itself, and then it takes a month for us to realise it's broken, and so that has been a real challenge. But we are moving now into the API cloud-based system, and it seems to be a lot more structurally sound. Yeah, where it is true, we're using that weighing information now, like it just happens. Like it's just every minute, I think it is, Farm IQ's asking the Gallagher or Tapari software system, any new files. And so that basis comes through just a CSV. It's pretty straightforward, but it seems to be much more structurally sound.
Question over here.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. You've obviously focused on your individual farms and the farmer owning the data and stuff. What about farmers wanting to work in the community and working in their catchment groups and looking at that bigger picture and stuff like that? Has your company looked at that kind of integration?
We have.
Yes.
Absolutely. No, we certainly have. And so we've looked at catchment groups in terms of being able to build dashboard reports for farms within a catchment. We certainly have, but who pays for it? It's been a challenge, like God's honest truth, and it has been. We do have that functionality, but by and someone would have to be able to pay for that. We've got close to agreements in that regard, but it hasn't really gone too much further. And it's just in a commercial reality, this is where we're at.
Maybe a couple more.
Yep, question. Did you just use AI to solve the philosophical question? Because in philosophy, there was a famous question. It's a sort of experiment. It's the Dr. Maria. She's blind, but she has every knowledge of color. Then would she have the same experience as someone who really see the color red? For example, if you collect all the data of red, as you are blind, that's one scenario. The other scenario is that you can subjectively feel the color red. Now are you proving that they have the same results? Did you just use AI to solve a philosophical question? Or it's just a pseudo simulation?
I'm not Maria, but I mean, this is a very deep question. I can answer this for 2 hours, but simply put, I think eventually AI can do both. Okay, AI can actually will be conscious. Some people don't agree with that. So what you're saying is the color is part of the consciousness, isn't it? If it is a part of the consciousness, then it doesn't matter you perceive it outside the now. Okay, that's the question. So AI, some philosophers in AI, which I tend to believe to some extent. I mean, a lot of people in Google, for example, look at DeepMind, or there's a guy called Lakshman who wrote a machine learning engineering book. These people actually believe we can actually consciously produce AI tools about the consciousness. I mean, we still live with, but there are things which actually they have produced, not just chess games or things like that, which is you tend to believe that yes, our consciousness can be driven by AI. But there are people like Roger Penrose, you heard him, and who won the Nobel Prize years. He doesn't believe that. Because there are things, for example, in physics, like direct delta symbolism in mathematics and physics. Sorry, direct operation. I can't imagine any AI can come up with that still. But people would say no, that it will eventually. So it's a very good question, but the answer lies with the AI can be conscious eventually. I tend to believe it could be. I mean, don't blame me for that.
Question to finish.
Okay, sure. I'm thinking of farm systems modeling, and thinking back to Armin's talk as well about collecting the right data or whether some data is missing. Is there, so you're collecting a ton of data from farmers, and it seems to be kind of opportunistic, whatever's convenient to collect and is being collected, you're trying to integrate it as it goes. Are there any obvious holes in the data that you collect that you can think of that might be useful for farm systems modeling?
Yeah, it's a good question. Where for the purposes of the benchmarking reports that we do have with that, there is that key sort of criteria such as stock numbers, fertilizer applications, grass growth. Now we do have that for that farm systems modelling. There is a minimum number of data points that FarmX will need to be able to input into it. But that's probably slightly different in terms of you can just manually do that yourself, where the software tool itself, there's certainly those minimum data points that you need to be able to produce a viable model. That's for sure. And I didn't talk about it today, but what we are sort of looking to do is, I said before, there's two different data platforms, FarmIQ and FarmX. And so FarmIQ, the company, acquired FarmX from AgResearch 4 years ago. And so it's been an industry good points to be able to one day, integrate the two platforms together. FarmX, I don't know if anyone's actually used it, but it looks like MS-DOS. Like it's a terrible user interface, but the model behind it is world leading. And so one day we'll build the brain of FarmX into an online platform like FarmIQ. But there's certainly a minimum amount of data points that you need to understand that scenario basis. So happy to chat about it.
Well, if we can thank Craig and Don. So thank you to all our speakers for their insights today. To you, our audience, for participating and engaging in the conversation that we're having. We've seen how precision tools, emission tracking, digital platforms, and AI are reshaping agriculture. And it's clear that innovation and sustainability will continue to define the future of farming in New Zealand. And it's our hope that events like this help us to connect, collaborate, and to take the next steps into that future together. So I invite you to join us over lunch and to continue the conversation and networking. Nami, thank you all for being here, and if we can thank the speakers once again. And I invite you to join us for lunch and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.